Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. In J.K. Rowling's magical universe, spells are more than just tools, they're fundamental to how the wizarding world works. But not all spells are equally useful. Among the vast range of magical incantations, some stand out not for their power, but for how utterly puzzling they are. Why were they created? What purpose do they serve? And can you even imagine a situation where they might come in handy? Today we're taking a closer look at the most useless and bizarre spells from the world of Harry Potter. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Melofors. One of the most bizarre and absurd spells ever showcased in the magical world, Melofors transforms the victim's head into, or rather encases it in, a pumpkin. Naturally, the question arises, why? What's the point of this spell? It's hard to imagine a serious duel where someone opts for Melofors instead of, say, Incendio or Petrificus Totalis. Even picturing Voldemort cursing his enemies with pumpkins is just laughable. Perhaps it was meant as magical humor, but from a practical standpoint, it's utterly ridiculous. Number 2, Slugulus Eructo. Now here's a truly experimental spell. It forces the victim to vomit slugs. Ron Weasley tried using it on Draco Malfoy in Chamber of Secrets, but thanks to his broken wand, the spell backfired on him. Again, why? What wizard thought, I want my enemy to throw up slugs? How do the slugs even form inside the body? Isn't that dangerous? Even assuming it works perfectly, the usefulness of this spell is extremely questionable. In combat? Unlikely. In daily life? Definitely not. Number 3, Alarte Ascendare. One of the more mysterious spells. It appeared in the films, but was never mentioned in the books. Gilderoy Lockhart used it during the dueling scene in an attempt to get rid of a snake. The result, the snake flew up into the air. What exactly does Alarte Ascendare do? Launch things upward, make them levitate? No one really knows, and even if it does launch objects, why use it when Wingardium Leviosa exists, a spell that offers full control over levitation? Alarte Ascendare feels like unfinished magic, a test spell abandoned after day 1. Number 4. Locomotor Mortis. This charm fuses the victim's legs together, making it impossible to walk properly. Neville Longbottom, for instance, once fell victim to this during a playful attack. Once again, why use this spell when Petrificus Totalis can immobilize the entire body? Locomotor Mortis feels like a weak attempt at combat magic. Sure, it might come in handy for pranksters at school, but in serious situations, it's nothing more than a magical version of tripping someone. Number 5, Brackium Emendo. And finally, one of the most dangerous and ambiguous spells, supposedly used to heal broken bones. Gilderoy Lockhart cast it on Harry after a Quidditch injury and completely removed all the bones from his arm. There's really no need to explain how catastrophic that result was. That kind of healing is worse than the original injury. Even if it was just Lockhart being incompetent, the spell itself raises concerns. In the hands of a villain, it could become a true weapon. Imagine someone deliberately removing a person's bones as revenge, a magical nightmare to say the least. Number 6. Densaugeo. It is a spell that makes a person's teeth grow at an alarming rate. Not stronger, not straighter, just bigger. Hermione Granger was the unfortunate test subject when Draco Malfoy's spell went wild during a scuffle in Goblet of Fire. Her front teeth were elongating at an alarming rate, Rowling writes. Even Madame Pomfrey was stunned, though Hermione used the opportunity to secretly shrink them down to her preferred size. A clever moment? But the spell itself? Useless. There's no practical reason for this magic to exist. It doesn't heal, it doesn't restrain, it doesn't disable. At best, it's a form of magical bullying, a cruel joke that turns your victim into a caricature. For medical use? Forget it. Madame Pomfrey never used Densaugeo to fix dental issues, probably because it doesn't fix anything, it makes them worse. It's like giving someone a nosebleed and calling it rhinoplasty. In battle, casting Densaugeo is a death sentence. While you're focused on growing your enemy's overbite, they're already throwing a Stupefy your way. Even Neville Longbottom would have time to knock you out cold. There's no strategic gain, no lasting effect, just shock value and maybe a few seconds of laughter before you're flat on the floor. If any spell was made purely out of spite, it's this one. You can almost imagine a vengeful teenage wizard shouting it in the hallway, hoping to humiliate someone before sprinting away. But that's all Densaugeo offers, embarrassment without consequence. It's not magic for victory, it's magic for bullies with bad timing. Number 7, Tarantallegra. The target's legs start dancing uncontrollably, flailing in every direction like a puppet with tangled strings. Draco Malfoy used it on Harry during their duel in Chamber of Secrets, thinking it would humiliate him. And for a few seconds, it did. Harry's legs jittered and spun across the floor, but the rest of him stayed perfectly upright, wand in hand, eyes focused, still dangerous. Not exactly a knockout move, that's the problem. The spell looks chaotic, but it doesn't actually stop anything. The victim can still cast spells, speak, aim. They're just dancing while doing it. Picture Harry in the Department of Mysteries, surrounded by Death Eaters. Bellatrix Lestrange shrieks and hurls a curse, and Harry replies with a spinning salsa. Does it distract her? Maybe, but does it defeat her? Not a chance. Voldemort would never waste breath on a spell that turns his opponent into a breakdancer. He'd sneer at it. Dance, Potter? He might whisper. Then die dancing. The duel would last seconds. Tarantallegra might earn a few laughs at the Yule Ball, but in a battle, it's suicidal. Hermione would never touch it. McGonagall would call it childish. Snape would deduct 10 points for even thinking about it. At best, it's a prank. Fred and George would use it on Ron at breakfast, sending him moonwalking into the fireplace. But as a real tool in a wizard's arsenal, Tarantallegra is pure nonsense. A dance-off is no match for a killing curse. Number 8, Furtiviso, sounds like it should be useful. A spell that causes intense dizziness, knocking your opponent off balance. But, in truth, it's the magical equivalent of making someone feel seasick for a few seconds. In a real duel, that window is useless. The dizziness fades before you've even aimed your next spell. No wonder it's never once used in the books. Not by Dumbledore, not by Voldemort, not even by Lockhart, who adored flashy nonsense. Imagine Hermione Granger in a confrontation with a Death Eater. She has a second to act. Would she waste it on Furtiviso? Not likely. She'd cast Stupefy, a reliable, powerful stunner that drops the target cold. Or Petrificus Totalis, which turns a moving opponent into a frozen statue. Compared to that, Furtiviso is a hiccup, an irritation, a spell someone might use in a school prank, not a war. It's tempting to think the spell could be strategic, disorient your enemy, then strike. But magic doesn't wait. One hesitation, one weak move, and you're on the floor. Spells like Impedimenta or Expelliarmus do the same job, but better, faster, cleaner. Why make your opponent dizzy when you can make them unconscious? Maybe Furtiviso was created by some 18th century duelist who thought it was clever to wobble his enemy before striking. Maybe it worked once, in a very polite duel. But in modern wizarding combat, it's a joke. If you bring Furtiviso to a fight with Bellatrix Lestrange, you won't make her dizzy, you'll make her laugh. Number 9, Orchideous. Orchideous, the one-tip flares, and out bursts a bouquet of fresh flowers, lilies, roses, maybe a daisy or two if the caster's in a cheerful mood. It's charming, no doubt. Dumbledore might use it to decorate the Great Hall before a feast. But in a duel? Picture Harry Potter, wand raised, sweat on his brow. Across from him stands Severus Snape, cloaked in shadow, ready to strike. Snape hisses, "Sectum Sempra," and Harry responds with, "Orchids?" Not exactly the shield charm of legends. There's no record of Orchideous being used in any serious confrontation. It's a spell of flourish, not force. Even in Fred and George's joke shop, where magic bends toward the ridiculous, this spell might be too soft. Flowers can't block a curse. They can't disarm a wand. At best, they make a room smell nice. At worst, they give your opponent time to laugh before hexing you into next week. Gilderoy Lockhart might have used it before a book signing. Imagine him conjuring roses before blowing kisses to his fans. That's where Orchideous belongs, among dramatics, charm, and harmless spectacle, not among duels, danger, or defense against the dark arts. The spell doesn't defend, attack, or even confuse. It decorates, and yet that's part of its strange beauty. Orchideous is one of those rare spells that reminds us magic isn't always about power. Sometimes it's about delight, but if your opponent is Bellatrix Lestrange, you'll want a wand full of curses, not carnations. Number 10, Peskipiksi Pesternomi. Peskipiksi Pesternomi, cried Gilderoy Lockhart, raising his wand dramatically as a swarm of Cornish pixies tore through his classroom. The result? Absolutely nothing, not even a flicker. The pixies didn't flinch. One of them even grabbed Neville Longbottom by the ears and dangled him from the chandelier. As Rowling writes in Chamber of Secrets, the pixies seized the opportunity to wreak havoc, completely ignoring their supposed banisher. Lockhart, of course, quickly retreated behind his desk and then out the door. The spell is infamous because it literally does nothing. There's no light, no force, no sound beyond the silly incantation. It's as if Lockhart made it up on the spot just to appear competent. And that's the point. Peskipiksi Pesternomi sounds magical. It feels like it should do something. But in the end, it's just noise wrapped in dramatic flair. The magical version of shouting at a thunderstorm. This failure exposes something deeper. In the wizarding world, not all spells are created out of necessity. Some are crafted for image. Lockhart, obsessed with fame, likely invented this spell as part of his theatrical persona. He was never interested in whether it worked. He just needed it to look impressive, to convince a room full of second years that he was a fearless pixie tamer. Even Professor Snape would have raised an eyebrow at such empty performance. If the spell has any use at all, it's as a distraction. A loud, confusing phrase meant to buy the caster a few seconds to run away. And that's exactly what Lockhart did. Perhaps in that sense it worked perfectly, not against pixies, but for cowards with good teeth and better publicists. Number 11, Waddiwasi. Waddiwasi is the kind of spell that makes you pause and ask, wait, that's it. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Professor Lupin uses it in one of the rare moments we ever see it. He spots a wad of chewing gum stuffed into a keyhole, courtesy of Peeves the poltergeist. With a casual flick of his wand, he mutters, "Waddiwasi," and the gum blasts out and shoots straight up Peeves's nose. Effective, sure. Amusing, definitely. But worth its own spell? That's another question. Think about it. Waddiwasi does one thing, launches small objects quickly and forcefully, but in a world where Wingardium Leviosa exists, a spell that lets you levitate and guide almost anything, this one seems oddly specific. Why create an entirely separate spell just to fling something fast, when magical telekinesis can do the same thing with more control? Imagine a serious wizard, like McGonagall or Snape, reaching for Waddiwasi in a duel. It would be laughable. Take this! Flying paperclip. It's like conjuring a slingshot in the middle of a gunfight. Even Lupin, as brilliant and kind as he is, likely used it more as a teaching moment than a display of real magical strategy. Still, its name is fun to say. It sounds like something Fred and George would shout while launching dung bombs out the window. That might be where Waddiwasi truly belongs. In the joke shop, not the classroom. Or maybe it's just another reminder that not all spells were meant to change the world. Some were simply made to humiliate Peeves. Number 12. Rictusempra. Rictusempra, the tickling charm. A spell that makes your opponent laugh uncontrollably. Sounds innocent enough. But when Harry used it against Draco Malfoy during their duel in the Chamber of Secrets, the effect was, well, underwhelming. Draco was on the floor, laughing so hard he couldn't breathe, the book tells us. But that lasted just seconds. Draco got up, angry, wand still in hand. Not exactly a tactical victory. It's hard to imagine any serious wizard using Rictusempra in a real duel. Picture facing off against Bellatrix Lestrange, wand raised, teeth bared, and you decide to make her giggle? You'd be dead before she finished laughing. It's like bringing a rubber chicken to a sword fight. Even Harry, who was barely 13, quickly moved on to more serious spells. The tickling charm became just another page in the spell book. Something you try once, then forget. In terms of magical design, Rictusempra feels more like a classroom prank than a combat technique. Maybe that's all it was ever meant to be. A joke, a harmless bit of chaos. Something Fred and George Weasley would cast on Percy during breakfast just to watch him spill his pumpkin juice. It fits the atmosphere of Hogwarts mischief, not the battlefield of the Second Wizarding War. Still, the spell survives in books and fan lists. Why? Because it's funny. Because it reminds us that even in a world of curses, monsters, and dark lords, there's room for laughter. Brief, uncontrollable laughter, followed, almost always, by a stunned silence and a stronger counterspell. Number 13, Tarbographus, a spell that, in theory, animates a quill to write on its own, on parchment, without a hand. That's it. No enchantment to enhance understanding, no charm to improve grammar, just a lonely quill scratching ink across paper with the detached purpose of a clockwork beetle. The existence of Tarbographus raises a singular question. Why? First referenced in the Standard Book of Spells Grade 3, the spell earns no more than a brief line of description and a footnote warning that it may produce erratic results when used near magical inkwells. The Hogwarts curriculum, rich with transformative wonders and defensive enchantments, barely acknowledges it. Even Professor Flitwick, who delighted in showing his students new charms with theatrical flair, never once mentioned it in class. Not during his demonstrations of the levitation charm, nor while teaching the summoning spell, nor even while instructing the basics of wand lighting. It is the kind of charm one might discover late at night in the library, tucked between the margins of a dusty tome no one has touched since 1874. Its premise is, on the surface, convenient. A quill that writes of its own accord, supposedly transcribing spoken words or dictation, could serve as a valuable aid during lectures, interviews, or while drafting long, tedious essays on the goblin rebellions of the 17th century. And yet in a castle filled with enchanted objects where portraits gossip and staircases move of their own volition, Tarbographus feels oddly primitive, redundant even. For what wizarding student doesn't already own an auto-answer quill? Fred and George Weasley, icons of magical mischief, once showcased the floor of enchanted writing tools during their final year at Hogwarts. Among their wares at Weasley's Wizard Wheezes was the self-writing essay quill, only half-functional and prone to plagiarism, but still more advanced than Tarbographus. Guaranteed to produce essays up to 12 inches long, read the slogan. Of course, the Ministry banned it after several students turned in near-identical essays on werewolf rites in the 20th century. And yet even a banned commercial product seemed to outperform the humble Tarbographus. The main flaw lies in the spell's undefined behavior. No definitive text explains how the quill determines what to write. Is it dictated by voice, thought, proximity to conversation? Does it transcribe every sound, every stutter, every irrelevant aside? Imagine a Hufflepuff during History of Magic, murmuring complaints about Professor Binns's drone-like voice, only to find his essay polluted with, "I can't believe I'm still awake." Or worse, Merlin's beard, "When will this end?" Worse still, imagine a Slytherin using it during a private conversation, only to have the quill immortalize secrets best left unrecorded. There are no tales of Hermione Granger using Tarbographus, and that fact alone speaks volumes. The brightest witch of her age, who time-travelled to attend extra classes, who brewed Polyjuice Potion in her second year, who modified her parents' memories to protect them from Voldemort, never once considered this spell worth her attention. When she took notes, it was with furious concentration and meticulous handwriting. She didn't rely on animated quills. She didn't need to. Magic wasn't a substitute for effort. It was a tool for understanding, not automation. Even Harry Potter, who relied on magical shortcuts more than Hermione did, showed no interest in the charm. During the Triwizard Tournament, when time was precious and he struggled to decipher golden eggs and solve riddles from mermaids, the Tarbographus spell might have helped him transcribe ideas to brainstorm with a floating quill. But he didn't use it. Instead, he used parchment, ink, and sheer desperation. The spell was never mentioned. It didn't deserve to be. There is also the matter of control. Magical scholars have warned that the spell, when cast imprecisely, causes the quill to interpret words far too literally. In one infamous case, recounted in The Practical Guide to Charms Gone Wrong, a wizard named Milton Prewett attempted to use Tarbographus during a Wizengamot hearing to record statements verbatim. He mispronounced the incantation, and the quill transcribed not only his speech but every sound in the room: coughs, sighs, foot shuffling, and the occasional spell muttered under someone's breath. The resulting parchment was 50 feet long and useless in court. He was fined 200 galleons for obstructing the hearing with magical nonsense. There's something unsettling about magic that operates without supervision. A floating quill, twitching on its own, driven by uncertain motives and open-ended command, invites chaos. What if the quill develops a mind of its own? Inanimate objects have been known to do so. Just ask anyone who's ever tried to reason with the sorting hat or calm a misbehaving broomstick. The line between enchantment and sentience in the wizarding world is dangerously thin. Consider, too, the cultural implications. In a society where house elves are mistreated for labor, where goblins are denied wand rights, the need to enchant a quill to do your writing seems almost grotesquely lazy. It's a spell born not of necessity but of magical decadence. At least the auto-answer quill had a commercial origin, capitalism and mischief wrapped in Weasley packaging. Tarbographus has no such defense. It is a spell that tries to solve a problem that was never there. In contrast, look at the ingenuity of other writing-related spells. Rita Skeeter, the venomous journalist of the Daily Prophet, used a quick quotes quill that exaggerated and twisted the words of her subject. It was a morally repugnant use of magic, but undeniably clever. The quill had personality, sly, manipulative, and almost sentient. Tarbographus, by comparison, is a blank slate. It offers no editorial input, no flair, no utility. Just ink on paper, plain and joyless. There is also the question of academic integrity. Professor McGonagall, stern guardian of Hogwarts tradition, surely would have banned Tarbographus in the classroom. If students could charm their quills to take notes for them, what was stopping them from using it during exams? Or to copy answers from nearby parchment? The spell invites dishonesty, even if unintentionally. It flirts with the same moral hazard as cheating quills and magical crib notes. Number 14. Aparecium. Of all the spells whispered, shouted, or silently cast within the vast and mysterious world of Harry Potter, few are as oddly underwhelming and strangely underused as the incantation Aparecium. This spell, designed to reveal invisible ink, sits quietly on the dusty shelves of magical knowledge, a forgotten tool in a world overflowing with enchantments of extraordinary power and utility. One might imagine a spell like this to be a staple of every magical detective's kit, a necessity in academic circles, or a common trick among mischievous students, and yet its presence in the series is fleeting, vague, and almost comically limited in practical application. Aparecium makes its most notable appearance in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, during the episode where Hermione Granger attempts to uncover the secrets of Tom Riddle's diary. She places the diary on a desk in the Gryffindor common room and casts Aparecium in hopes of revealing hidden writing. Nothing happens. The diary remains blank, absorbing her efforts with stoic silence. The spell's failure is presented without much comment, and from that moment it slips into the background, never again brought to the forefront of magical strategy. Its only confirmed use is in a moment that underlines not its success but its futility. This is curious in a world where messages can be hidden by hundreds of magical means, from enchantments and concealment charms to entire rooms that appear only when needed. A spell limited solely to invisible ink feels almost laughably narrow. One begins to wonder why such a spell would be taught at all. Hogwarts is a place where the curriculum is crammed with essential survival tools for both ordinary school life and magical emergencies. Why waste time on a spell that only reveals a vanishing trick used more commonly in Muggle spy novels than in magical correspondence? It's worth considering the larger context of magical concealment. Wizards and witches have access to the Revelio charm, capable of exposing hidden objects, illusions, and even magical creatures in some cases. In Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald, the spell is used to unmask enchantments far more complex than invisible ink. Similarly, Dumbledore's Pensive provides a way to dive into memory and uncover truths hidden in the mind. Compared to such marvels, Aparecium seems like a child's toy, quaint, but out of place among spells of such breadth and depth. What makes Aparecium even more redundant is the fact that magical texts themselves often possess enchantments that protect their secrets far beyond the simplicity of invisible ink. The Half-Blood Prince's Potions book, for instance, uses a combination of misleading instructions and notes that are only understood through experimentation and inference. There's no indication that Aparecium would help in deciphering them. The Marauder's Map, one of the most famous magical documents in the series, explicitly resists being read by unauthorized users. When Snape attempts to interrogate the map, it insults him rather than revealing its contents. Aparecium has no place here. The map's creators evidently considered more potent magical protections than mere invisible ink. If a spell is only effective in such a narrow scope, it begs the question of whether it deserves to be categorized as part of a witch or wizard's essential magical arsenal. Imagine a toolbox where one of the tools only functions on a single kind of screw, one that no longer exists. That's Aparecium. It suggests a time when invisible ink may have had more significance, perhaps in the medieval wizarding world, when written communication had fewer safeguards and spellwork had not yet evolved to include the layered charms seen in modern magical objects. It's also telling that Aparecium is never used during the many times our heroes attempt to uncover hidden information. When Harry and Ron steal Lockhart's office key to break into Snape's storeroom, they don't use Aparecium to check for hidden traps or secret notes. When they investigate the Room of Requirement, no one thinks to try it. Even Hermione, who is known for her obsessive research and bookworm tendencies, never suggests Aparecium as a method to discover the secrets of Horcruxes or Deathly Hallows. She, of all people, would use it if it had value. The absence becomes deafening when we remember that the magical world often uses physical methods of concealment, like hiding a letter behind a portrait or encrypting it within a painting. There's no indication that wizards rely on invisible ink as a primary means of secrecy. In fact, the only time we see invisible ink used in any meaningful way is in conjunction with more complex enchantments, such as those used by Dolores Umbridge. Her blood quill writes, using the student's own blood, but this is not invisible. It is horrifyingly visible and painful. There is no place for Aparecium in such dark magic. The only other canon reference to invisible ink comes from the Tales of Beedle the Bard. In the introduction, Dumbledore discusses notes he made on the tales using invisible ink, suggesting a potential intellectual or scholarly use. But again, this is anecdotal and not shown in practice. Even here, Aparecium is not mentioned as the spell used to reveal these notes. It's likely that Dumbledore, with his knowledge of ancient magic and runes, had other more elegant methods at his disposal. The suggestion that he would resort to something as elementary as Aparecium seems implausible. Given its limitations, one might wonder if Aparecium isn't even meant to be a spell of practical consequence, but rather a vestigial piece of Hogwarts tradition, the magical equivalent of teaching cursive handwriting. Perhaps it is taught to first or second-year students as a stepping stone, a way to understand the concept of revealing magic, a mere whisper of the complexity they will later encounter in charms like Revelio or Legilimens. It is an academic exercise, not a battlefield tool. Number 15, Serpensortia. Of all the spells introduced in the Harry Potter universe, few seem as inexplicably out of place as Serpensortia, a charm that causes a live snake to shoot out of the caster's wand. First seen in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets during the infamous dueling club scene, the spell is cast by Draco Malfoy in a hasty attempt to one-up Harry Potter. As the students watch, a black serpent slithers out of Malfoy's wand and onto the polished floor of the Great Hall. The moment is dramatic, eerie even, but upon closer inspection, it reveals just how impractical and redundant this spell truly is in the world of highly advanced magical combat. The spell's limitations become immediately obvious when viewed in the context of magical dueling. In a universe where spells like Stupefy can incapacitate opponents instantly and Expelliarmus can disarm with a flick of the wrist, what strategic advantage does a snake offer? It's slow, vulnerable, and relies on primitive methods of attack, fangs, and intimidation. Unlike curses or hexes, a summoned snake has no magical enhancement. It doesn't fly, it doesn't breathe fire, it simply hisses and slides toward the target. The only real danger it poses is to someone so petrified of reptiles that they freeze in place, and even then a simple Immobulus or Petrificus totalis can stop it cold. Malfoy's use of Serpensortia reveals much about his character, flashy, theatrical, and desperate to frighten rather than truly harm. He likely chose the spell for its showmanship, assuming the sight of a snake would rattle Harry. But he misjudged his opponent. Not only did Harry remain calm, he proceeded to speak to the serpent in Parseltongue, unknowingly exposing a dark link to Voldemort and alarming everyone in the hall. The snake itself posed such a little threat that Snape didn't even bother eliminating it outright. He merely cast Vipera Evanesca to vanish it, a second-year spell nullified in less than 2 seconds by a teacher. The duel moved on and the serpent was forgotten. Consider the absurdity of using Serpensortia in a real magical battle. Take, for instance, the Battle of the Department of Mysteries, where skilled Death Eaters clashed with the Order of the Phoenix. There were spells flying in every direction, Crucio, Impedimenta, Reducto. In that chaos, what would a conjured snake do? It would be trampled underfoot or blasted apart by the first stray Jinx. Bellatrix Lestrange alone, with her penchant for the dark arts and erratic spellwork, could obliterate it without a glance. In such a fight, a snake is not a weapon, it's a joke. Even in psychological warfare, the snake fails to deliver. Fear is a potent tool in battle, and many spells play upon it. Ridiculous counters the boggart, which itself preys on terror. Dementors paralyze victims with their very presence. Compared to such entities, a mundane snake has limited reach. Even students in their early years at Hogwarts are taught to resist fear-inducing illusions and master their nerves. By the time a witch or wizard is ready for combat, it's unlikely that a garden-variety viper will do more than draw a sneer. The inconsistency of the spell's utility becomes more glaring when compared to other creature-conjuring spells. Consider Expecto Patronum, which summons a silver animal form not only beautiful but deadly to Dementors, or Confringo, which can cause devastating explosions. Even Avis, a relatively benign charm that conjures birds, can be combined with a Pugno to direct them toward an enemy, as Hermione Granger did against Ron Weasley in a fit of rage. That's at least strategic. In contrast, the snake from Serpensortia comes with no command. It slithers, and that's it, unless the caster speaks Parseltongue or has some form of magical control over serpents. It acts independently and slowly. J.K. Rowling seems to have used Serpensortia more as a narrative tool than a real-world spell. Its primary function was to reveal to Harry's ability to talk to snakes, a talent he himself did not fully understand. "He's a Parselmouth," murmurs one student as the great hall falls silent. This moment becomes a key turning point in the series, making Harry question his connection to Voldemort and setting the stage for deeper revelations about his past. But beyond this plot device, the spell fades into obscurity. No character ever uses it again in any meaningful way, and it's never mentioned as part of standard magical defense. Let us imagine, for the sake of argument, that a young Auror in training decided to test Serpensortia in a controlled duel. They raise their wand, shout the incantation, and watch as a thick green python crashes to the ground. Their opponent, perhaps another trainee, barely blinks. A flick of their wand, and the snake is airborne, frozen mid-strike by a perfectly cast Glacius. It shatters upon impact with the ground, leaving behind only a slick puddle of magical residue. The duel resumes, and the Auror makes a mental note to never use that spell again. In situations involving muggles where a magical creature might cause confusion or delay, the spell still fails to impress. A snake in a suburban street might send someone screaming, yes. But in the time it takes for the snake to slither from one tip to footpath, the target could flee, call the police, or pull out a golf club. The delay, the lack of direction, and the mundanity of the animal make the spell useless even for stealth or distraction. It lacks the subtlety of confundo, the immediacy of obliviate, and the drama of incendio. Even for animal lovers or magical naturalists like Newt Scamander, there's no record of Serpensortia being used to study or tame serpents. If anything, summoning a snake with no history, biology, or magical classification would be the opposite of scientific curiosity. The snake is conjured from nothing, devoid of ecosystem, temperament, or magical property. It's a glorified illusion, given physical form and no future. Scamander, who catalogued and cared for magical creatures, would find little value in such a spell. It offers nothing new, no insight into serpent behavior, and no conservationist merit. Number 16, Revelio. In the shimmering vaults of the Room of Requirement, as Harry Potter stood among towering piles of forgotten relics, cursed cabinets, and faded tomes, he uttered the incantation Revelio with a flick of his wand. A subtle breeze stirred a few cobwebs. Nothing else happened. The dark locket they were searching for remained hidden. The spell, designed to reveal the concealed, had failed. And this was not the first time. Time and again, Revelio had proven to be one of the most inconsistent tools in a wizard's magical arsenal, a spell that often promised more than it could deliver. Revelio is, on parchment, a spell with immense potential. Meant to expose illusions, hidden objects, or even invisible beings, it holds the allure of ultimate clarity in a world filled with deception. But the magic of theory and the harsh light of application are two very different things. While Hogwarts students are taught the spell in their 4th or 5th year as a useful trick for uncovering the unseen, its real-world effectiveness borders on chance. A spell that is supposed to be definitive is instead strangely arbitrary. Consider the Marauder's Map, an enchanted piece of parchment that reveals every nook, cranny, and occupant of Hogwarts Castle in real time. Its creators, Messrs. Mooney, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs, laced it with such advanced concealment magic that even the mighty spell Revelio cannot pierce its secrets. When Snape attempted to expose its contents, the map insulted him instead of revealing anything. If Revelio were truly reliable, it would have been able to override the illusion. But as readers see, it did absolutely nothing. One might argue that the map was an exceptional artifact, created by 4 of Hogwarts' brightest and most mischievous minds. But even with less complex concealments, Revelio struggles. When Hermione Granger attempted to uncover the secrets of various Horcruxes, she didn't rely on the spell. She pored over ancient texts, consulted magical theory, and brewed detection potions. Not once did she propose using Revelio to find the locket, the cup, or Nagini. If the brightest witch of her age didn't find the spell useful in their most crucial moments, that says more than any textbook could. In contrast, Dumbledore, a wizard of near mythical power, relied on legilimency, pensive memories, and the complex art of magical deduction to uncover truths. His tools were ancient knowledge and intuition, not chance-based spells. If Revelio truly worked as intended, surely a man like Dumbledore would have wielded it with precision. Yet even when dealing with hidden rooms, cursed artifacts, and double agents, he never once uttered that spell in the narrative. What makes Revelio even more disappointing is its erratic nature. The spell worked in some situations, like when Newt Scamander used it to reveal the real identity of Grindelwald in Fantastic Beasts, The Crimes of Grindelwald. But that scene left more questions than answers. Why did the spell work on a polyjuice potion that's otherwise resistant to so many forms of detection? Why does it reveal glamours in some scenes and not in others? There is no consistency. No set of magical rules governs its behavior, making its application unreliable at best and superstitious at worst. Magic in the wizarding world usually follows certain logic. An Expelliarmus always tries to disarm. A Patronus always repels Dementors, assuming the caster's emotions are strong enough. Even spells like Protego have defined limits, but Revelio seems to function on whimsy. Its success depends not on magical power or precision, but on the nature of the concealment, and even then, often without reason. In magical duels or investigations, relying on Revelio is the equivalent of closing your eyes and hoping the truth jumps out. Take, for example, the case of Mad-Eye Moody. Well, Barty Crouch Jr. disguised as him. A full school year passed, and not a single teacher suspected a thing. His Polyjuice disguise fooled everyone, including Dumbledore. Yet again, no use of Revelio ever surfaced. If the spell had any dependable detection ability, wouldn't someone, anyone, have cast it on a man so famously paranoid and unpredictable? Instead, the deception endured until the very end. Revelio could have been the turning point, but it wasn't even considered. Even in Deathly Hallows, when Ron, Harry, and Hermione are ambushed and captured by Snatchers, Revelio could have clarified identities. Instead, the trio relies on stammers, half-truths, and Hermione's disfiguring spell. The captors try to guess their identities by looking at photos and scars, not once using a spell that supposedly reveals all. If the dark forces who ruled Britain at the time did not trust Revelio for verification, that speaks volumes. Perhaps the most damning failure of Revelio is its impotence against true magical concealment. Hidden rooms, unplottable locations, and magical disguises often rely on layered charms, some of which are centuries old. The Room of Requirement itself is a prime example. Despite its magical flux and hidden nature, it never once reacts to the spell. Harry's group uses luck and necessity to find it, not detection magic. Revelio is simply not up to the task. The spell is also notably absent in serious investigative work. Auras like Kingsley Shacklebolt and Nymphadora Tonks use other methods. They interview witnesses, analyze magical traces, and rely on instinct. Revelio could theoretically unearth secret compartments, hidden evidence, or glamoured threats, but it never appears in those contexts. Wizards who work in high-risk, high-magic fields have essentially abandoned it. That isn't oversight, it's insight. Its only consistent use appears in the most superficial scenarios, revealing hidden messages, perhaps, or uncovering a minor charm on a basic object. In those cases, it acts more like a party trick than a cornerstone of magical truth. No one uses it to find Horcruxes, track criminals, or unveil traitors. Its power lies not in practice, but in the illusion of usefulness. It's the magical equivalent of throwing salt over one's shoulder, not harmful, but not especially helpful either. Even within Hogwarts, where spells are tested, challenged, and evolved, Revelio is rarely seen outside the classroom. Professors like Flitwick and McGonagall, masters of charms and transfiguration respectively, never use it in dire moments, not during attacks, not when searching for students, and not when uncovering plots. It is a spell taught but seldom used, like cursive handwriting in the Muggle world, elegant, traditional, and mostly outdated. The spell's limitations are not just theoretical, they are demonstrated repeatedly. In The Half-Blood Prince, when Draco hides the vanishing cabinet, none of the teachers think to reveal the presence of a powerful magical object. The spell could have changed everything, but it simply wasn't considered. Either it didn't work, or it wasn't worth the risk of relying on it. Draco's secret operation thrived in the blind spots Revelio couldn't illuminate. It is ironic that in a world filled with magical artifacts that deceive, disillusion, and disguise, the one spell designed to counter them is so thoroughly toothless. In contrast, potions like Veritaserum, objects like the Foeglass, and even creatures like Thestrals or magical portraits offer more dependable insight. Wizards learn to rely on observation, experience, and intuition, rarely on a flick of the wand and a whispered Revelio. This isn't to say the spell is entirely useless. In scripted environments, controlled spaces with limited concealment, it might provide a mild advantage. Students could use it to find hidden messages in their textbooks. A librarian might locate an overdue book tucked between shelves. But for anything beyond the mundane, its function collapses. The spell falters when reality becomes complex, when magic becomes layered, when truth requires more than just sight. The tragic thing about Revelio is its promise. It seduces young witches and wizards with the idea of an ultimate revealer, a way to cut through lies and illusions. In a world where danger lurks behind every tapestry and potion bottle, the need for such a tool is real. But Revelio, isn't it? It never was. The more one reads, the more apparent it becomes. Revelio is a spell born of optimism, not efficacy. And perhaps that is why it remains. Not as a spell of utility, but as a symbol. A sign that magic, like life, cannot always be simplified, that the deepest truths aren't uncovered with a single word, but through effort, persistence, and sometimes faith. Revelio pretends to be a key, but often it's just a question in disguise. If one wants to find the truth in the wizarding world, they don't shout, "Revelio." They dig, they listen, they follow the clues no spell can highlight, because the real secrets, those worth knowing, are never so easily revealed. Number 17. Flamma Vertis. Flamma Vertis, Latin-sounding, dramatic, almost poetic. The words themselves spin off the tongue like the very fire they conjure. And yet, beneath the shimmering, whirling flame, lies a hard truth. This spell, dazzling as it may be, is utterly, laughably impractical. In a world where magic is a lifeline, a shield, and sometimes a weapon, Flamma Vertis stands out as a theatrical flourish with no clear purpose, something you might cast to entertain an audience, but never to survive a night in the Forbidden Forest. When Hermione Granger first saw the spell demonstrated in a dusty old charms textbook titled Luminaria Arcana, a study of magical light, she was at best unimpressed. A spinning flame hovering a few feet in the air, emitting warmth but neither burning nor attacking, no defensive properties, no utility outside the realm of aesthetics. "It's like fireworks with stage fright," she later joked to Ron while revising for their OWLs. And indeed, if a spell's merit could be judged by its usefulness in the real dangers of wizarding life, Flamma Vertis would be left forgotten on a dusty shelf in the back of Flourish and Blots. The spell's original inventor, Phineas Thropple, was a flamboyant wizard from the early 1800s, known more for his magical pageantry than practical innovation. He introduced Flamma Vertis at the Grand Exhibition of Magical Wonders in 1834, where it earned applause not for power or utility, but for being prettier than a phoenix on parade. Thropple's spell was supposed to revolutionize magical performance art, and in that niche context, it did. For a while, drawing rooms across wizarding Europe glowed with spinning flames that twirled to the rhythm of enchanted violins. But even Thropple's own biographer admitted it was artistry, not necessity, that gave Flamma Vertis its brief moment of fame. In the dark days of the First Wizarding War, no one reached for Flamma Vertis in duels against Death Eaters. Wands flicked with deadly precision, summoning shields, curses, hexes, and firestorms. But no aura ever conjured a rotating flame to hold off a killing curse. In fact, the spell is notably absent from defensive magical theory and the dark forces a guide to self-protection. Even Professor Lupin, in his practical lessons on battling boggarts and dark creatures, never once entertained its use. If anything, the spell's best chance at usefulness would be in confusing a particularly stupid troll, though even that seems optimistic. Fred and George Weasley, the eternal champions of magical mischief, did find some use for it. During the infamous fireworks riot of 1996, when the twins unleashed chaos upon Dolores Umbridge's regime, Flamma Vertis made a brief cameo. The twin flames spun in perfect synchrony above the Great Hall, briefly distracting the inquisitorial squad before exploding into a rain of glowing feathers. But even they preferred more explosive spells, enchanted Catherine wheels, and dragons of fire that roared across the stone ceiling. In their product catalogue for Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, Flamma Vertis was only ever mentioned as part of a limited edition romantic hex package featuring flames of affection to impress a date. It never sold well. In the cold, oppressive night of the forbidden forest, Flammavertis might offer a little light, but so would Lumos, with far more control and less ostentation. And if warmth was needed, the charm Incendio offered real fire. What use, then, is a flame that twirls but doesn't burn, glows but doesn't scare, dances but doesn't defend? Hagrid, who often found himself in that very forest, once said, "It's a bit like wearing a sparkly cloak when what you need's a shield. Looks nice, but don't stop a fang or a claw." During one unfortunate incident, a third-year Ravenclaw named Beatrice Fleetwood attempted to use Flammavertis during a Care of Magical Creatures class. She had meant to dazzle a group of bowtruckles into behaving, perhaps inspired by the belief that fire commands respect. Instead, the whirling flame startled the creatures, who panicked and fled into the woods, leaving her scratched and humiliated. Professor Grubbly Plank merely shook her head and muttered something about children playing with fireworks in a storm. Even the Death Eaters, with their penchant for dramatic entrances and flaming skulls, never touched Flammavertis. Their dark marks burned with purpose, terror, and legacy. This little spinning flame, for all its beauty, lacked any emotion beyond whimsy. Bellatrix Lestrange wouldn't be caught dead using such a spell, unless it was to mock someone before delivering a real curse. "A flame for fools," she might have called it, with that sinister laugh curling through the dark like smoke. There was, however, one recorded use of Flammavertis that nearly gave it relevance. At the Yule Ball in 1994, Professor Flitwick used the spell to create a ceiling-wide canopy of twirling fire during the final wall. The flames glowed softly in amber and violet hues, casting long shadows across the enchanted icicles and polished stone. It was, by all accounts, a magical moment. Hermione herself noted in her diary, "I've never seen anything so delicate and moving in magic." And yet even she admitted later, "It was beautiful, but I'd still rather learn something that could knock out a manticore." It must be said that there is a peculiar category of magic that exists solely for embellishment. The wizarding world, despite its dangers, is also one of theatre and style. Just as peacocks are part of Malfoy Manor and mirrors talk back in the leaky cauldron, not every spell is meant to save lives or change the world. Flammavertis fits squarely in this tradition, magical decoration for the sake of beauty. Yet even within that category, it is overshadowed. Confringo, used gently, could create bursts of coloured flame. Lumos Maxima could light an entire room with grandeur. Why settle for a rotating flame that refuses to do anything else? In 1997, Luna Lovegood tried using Flammavertis during one of her attempts to communicate with what she called fire sprites. She believed the flame's rotation would attract magical fire creatures from other realms. Nothing came, of course, except for a minor carpet fire when the spell spun too close to a velvet cushion. The Lovegoods' living room still bore the singe marks for years. Charity Burbage, the Muggle Studies professor, once theorized that Flammavertis might have originally been derived from ancient Muggle traditions of fire worship. Early wizards may have copied tribal fire dances, transforming them into harmless, magical displays. It was never about use, it was about wonder. But as she noted in a lecture, magic evolves. What once amazed a crowd now only wastes wand energy. There are, of course, worse spells, spells that backfire, spells that curse the caster, spells that summon flocks of geese when you wanted clean laundry, but even those had stories, moments of unintended comedy or tragedy. Flammavertis is simply forgettable. No one has ever cried because of it. No one has been saved by it. It exists in the background, a glittering decoration in the margins of magical history. In the vast tapestry of Hogwarts education, students crave power, knowledge, and the spells that might one day save their lives. The defense against the dark arts classroom echoes with cries of Stupefy and Expelliarmus. The charms class rings with the delight of Wingardium Leviosa. But no one gathers in anticipation when Flammavertis is introduced. It draws polite claps, maybe a "ooh," then it is quickly forgotten, replaced by spells of consequence. Even in fan compilations, those elaborate lists of most dangerous spells, darkest curses, forgotten magic. Flamma Vertis rarely appears. It is neither dangerous nor forgotten. It's simply irrelevant. A magical shrug. Neville Longbottom once tried to use it during a DA meeting. He had meant to impress Ginny Weasley, perhaps hoping that the spinning flame would cast a romantic light. The flame did spin, it did glow, but the moment fizzled when Ginny raised an eyebrow and said, "Was that supposed to do something?" Neville, ever good-natured, laughed it off and went back to practicing Petrificus Totalis. And so, Flamma Vertis lives on, not in spells of power, not in duels or textbooks, but in the occasional wedding, perhaps during a waltz, spinning gently above the heads of wizards who no longer care what magic can do, but how it makes them feel. It is the scent of nostalgia in spell form, a memory of a time when magic was for wonder, not war. Still, in a world like theirs, riddled with danger, darkness, and the ever-looming shadow of history, there's something stubbornly lovely about a spell that insists on being beautiful and nothing more. Yet even beauty in the world of wands and whispers must often earn its place, and Flamma Vertis, for all its swirling flame, hasn't. Number 19, Ebublio. It was a quiet Tuesday morning at Hogwarts when third-year student Kevin Twycross decided to demonstrate the Ebublio charm during Professor Flitwick's charms practical exam. The classroom was still, the air heavy with anticipation, each desk a stage for a new spell. Kevin, however, had prepared something light-hearted, as he put it. While others prepared stunning spells or demonstrated protective enchantments with flair, Kevin flicked his wand, cried Ebublio, and was instantly surrounded by a flurry of glistening soap bubbles. Professor Flitwick gave a polite, if confused, applause. "Very whimsical," he said, with an uncertain smile. The class didn't laugh. They blinked, unsure whether this was a joke or a mental lapse. Even the ghosts of Ravenclaw Tower, known for their eccentric humour, had no witty comment. The bubbles floated across the room, popping harmlessly on books, ink bottles, and one of the window panes. For all the effort and wand work, Kevin's grade was a pitiful acceptable. It's hard to understand how a spell like Ebublio earned a place in the curriculum at all. A charm that releases a stream of multicoloured bubbles may bring joy to toddlers at St. Mungo's, or serve as decoration at a magical carnival, but even the most forgiving of educators would struggle to assign it a practical value. There are countless spells in the wizarding world with flexible uses. Lumos lights the dark, Accio retrieves what's lost, and even a prank spell like Tarantallegra can momentarily distract an opponent. But Ebublio? It's pure whimsy with no sting. During a Defense Against the Dark Arts mock duel in Harry's 5th year, members of Dumbledore's army took turns practicing quick, offensive and defensive manoeuvres. Ginny Weasley was particularly adept with the Bat-Bogey Hex. Neville managed a sturdy shield charm after much effort, and Luna sent a barrage of jelly-legs jinxes with eerie calm. Had someone dared to cast Ebublio in that room, they'd likely have been hexed before the first bubble burst. A spell that has no offensive, defensive, or utility purpose in a duel stands out like a quill without ink. When Fred and George Weasley were inventing joke products for their future shop, they considered dozens of magical novelties. The extendable ears were a hit, as were the canary creams and skiving snack boxes, but even they, with all their irreverent creativity, never wasted a galleon developing a bubble wand powered by Ebublio. If the kings of magical nonsense found no use for it, that should have been a sign. Imagine the scene at a magical emergency. A troll rampages through Diagon Alley. Aurors rush in, casting stunning spells and protective enchantments to contain the chaos. A bystander, heart-pounding, whips out their wand and yells, "Ebublio!" only to produce a stream of harmless, shimmering bubbles that float into the air and pop against the troll's leathery hide. The absurdity of it would be almost poetic if it weren't so dangerous. Even within the classroom, under the guidance of the most patient teachers, Ebublio rarely inspires excitement. Professor McGonagall once paused her transfiguration lesson to observe a few fifth years attempting recreational charms after hours. She gave a withering glance at the girl who was happily covering the room in pastel bubbles. "Miss Greengrass," she said with cool severity, "perhaps your time would be better spent mastering switching spells rather than child's play. Historically, no known magical duel, battle, or confrontation has ever mentioned Ebublio." The Battle of Hogwarts was a cacophony of light, sound, and screams. Students and staff alike hurled curses and shields with life-or-death urgency. Imagine if someone had shouted, "Ebublio!" during that battle. A Death Eater might pause in confusion for a second. Yes, but then, as bubbles bounced off their mask, they'd proceed to cast a deadly curse with no interruption. Some magical historians speculate that Ebublio may have once been used as a celebratory spell in court rituals or wizard weddings centuries ago. A few old tomes, dusty and half-forgotten in the restricted section, reference soap globes of joy during the coronation of a wizard king in Normandy. But even those records treat the spell more as festive ornamentation than genuine enchantment. Hermione Granger, when asked during an interview years later about underwhelming spells, reportedly sighed and said, "Ebublio is charming in the most literal sense, but let's not pretend it ever saved a life or solved a riddle." Coming from the most brilliant witch of her generation, that sentence closed the book for many. If Hermione couldn't find an academic use for a charm, it likely had none. Dobby the house elf once attempted Ebublio in the Hogwarts kitchens, hoping to clean a mountain of teacups in an imaginative way. The result was less than successful. The bubbles, instead of cleaning, scattered soot and food remnants in every direction, coating every dish and elf in sticky soap foam. The kitchens took 2 hours to clean, and Dobby was forced to admit, Dobby is not knowing why Wizards is loving this silly spell. Even Gilderoy Lockhart, whose spellcasting abilities were questionably shallow, didn't favour Ebublio. In his book Magical Me, he describes a moment in his youth when he tried the spell to impress a crowd. "I summoned a beautiful cloud of sparkling bubbles," he writes, "but alas, a Kneasel nearby popped them all with great ferocity. My robes were soaked, and my dignity was not recovered until autumn. If Lockhart couldn't turn Ebublio into a heroic tale, it's a true testament to its mediocrity. There's also the issue of duration. Most Ebublio spells last only a few seconds before the bubbles pop or vanish. They don't stick around, they don't float indefinitely, and they certainly don't distract for long. Try casting them during an exam, and the room will be quiet again before a professor finishes taking points for your idiocy. They serve no lasting purpose, no lingering effect, and thus no reason for a wizard of sense to use them. In the wizarding world, where even mundane tasks like cleaning are handled by spells such as Scourgify or Tergio, a spell like Ebublio is purely ornamental. It's magic for the sake of magic, and not in a useful way. Aesthetics alone can't justify the presence of a charm that requires wand movement, pronunciation, and concentration, only to produce floating orbs of air and soap. Children at Hogwarts do find joy in it, first years especially. During breaks, a few might sneak off to the courtyard and release bubbles into the wind, laughing as they chase them or try to freeze them mid-air with a chilly charm. But by 4th year, those same students would rather perfect a stunning spell or learn how to apparate. Ebublio simply doesn't age well in the wizarding curriculum. Even magical creatures have little interest in the bubbles. Hagrid once tried using them to entertain flobberworms, assuming the gentle movement might engage the sluggish beasts. Instead, the worms slithered away with uncommon speed, as if insulted by the very presence of such silliness. "Guess they're not bubble fans," Hagrid reportedly muttered. In contrast, nearly every other known spell has layers of meaning or function. Even a spell like Rictusempra, which causes laughter, can be used strategically to disarm or distract. But Ebublio's only consistent outcome is mess, mild confusion, or momentary joy. If that's not the definition of magical uselessness, what is? Draco Malfoy once mocked a classmate for using Ebublio during a charms demonstration. "What are you planning to do?" he sneered, according to an account by Theodore Nott. "Tickle the Dark Lord to death with bubbles?" The insult spread through Slytherin like wildfire, and the student never used the spell again. In the quiet moments of Hogwarts, when the halls are empty and candles flicker in forgotten corners, perhaps one might cast Ebublio for peace, for silence, for a spark of wonder. But in the thick of real magical life, exams, duels, crises, heartbreaks, it has no voice, no power, just soap, air, and an illusion of magic. Had Severus Snape seen a student cast Ebublio during an actual defense lesson, one can imagine the fury. His black eyes narrowing, cloak swirling behind him, voice like ice. 5 points from Gryffindor for wasting my time with theatrical fluff. And indeed, Snape valued purpose. Every flick of the wand had to count, and Ebublio never did. It is a charm that belongs in fairy stories in the hands of toddlers, or as a novelty at birthday parties. There it might earn a giggle, a clapping of small hands. But in the rich and dangerous world of magic, where every choice can ripple into disaster or brilliance, a soap bubble is just that, a fragile sphere, full of nothing. Number 20, Canarius. There exists a curious little spell in the magical world that baffles even the most imaginative witches and wizards. Canary Transfiguration, more whimsically known as Canarius. When cast, this spell temporarily covers the target in bright yellow feathers and forces them into a fit of frenzied, high-pitched chirping, like a startled flock of canaries. For a few moments, the unfortunate victim becomes a human-avian hybrid, a bizarre spectacle that has little purpose beyond laughter and mischief. While some might call it harmless fun, others question why such a spell was ever invented in the first place. In a world where magic can save lives, defeat dark forces, or alter the very laws of nature, Canarius seems to stand as a feathered footnote in the grand book of wizardry. The most well-known use of this spell was during a memorable scene in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, when Hermione Granger, red-eyed and furious, stormed into the Gryffindor common room and hurled a flock of canaries at Ron Weasley after catching him snogging Lavender Brown. The canaries were still twittering feebly on the floor, J.K. Rowling writes, having beaten their wings against the back of Ron's head and clawed at his face before losing interest. While the moment is undeniably humorous and loaded with emotional subtext, it does little to justify the spell's existence as anything more than a magical prank. This was not a spell taught in the curriculum at Hogwarts. It did not appear in the Standard Book of Spells by Miranda Goshawk, nor was it included in defensive magic or even the more obscure branches of transfiguration. It was simply there, learned, perhaps, from an older student, or discovered tucked in the margins of an old charm book. And this begs the question, who invented Canarius and why? According to Hogwarts lore, the spell originated during the 19th century as part of a comedic hexing tradition among students. A prankster by the name of Barnabas Widdershins, known for turning his peers into all manner of ridiculous creatures, supposedly created it after losing a bet with a Ravenclaw girl. She dared him to duel without his wand, and when he predictably lost, she transfigured his robes into feathers. Inspired, Barnabas refined the trick into a standalone Jinx. While the details are as patchy as a molting bird, what remains clear is that Canarius has persisted long past its creator, etched into the unofficial spell lexicon of mischievous youth. In practical dueling, Canarius is utterly useless. It does not stun or incapacitate. It offers no shield or distraction. The victim remains fully conscious and capable of using their wand. In fact, many skilled duelists, when struck with it, have retaliated with far more dangerous spells, turning a moment of humour into a near disaster. Professor Flitwick, former dueling champion and charms master, once remarked, at a Ravenclaw house meeting, "If anyone thinks feathers will win them a duel, they'll find themselves plucked and hexed before they can chirp a second time." And yet the spell survives, not as a weapon, but as a symbol of youthful rebellion. The walls of Hogwarts have echoed with the cries of angry canaries more than once. Fred and George Weasley used it in a series of staged performances during their 5th year, often casting it on unsuspecting Slytherins in the middle of dinner. "Watch out for the yellow storm," the twins would say with mischievous grins, before unleashing a flurry of chirping chaos that sent plates flying and Professor Snape into a silent rage. Still, beyond the halls of Hogwarts, the spell has no legitimate use. Aurors scoff at it. Healers ignore it. Magical law enforcement doesn't even classify it as a jinx worthy of registration. It has never been recorded in the annals of ministry duels or used during any known encounter with Death Eaters. Even the most eccentric practitioners of magic, such as Xenophilius Lovegood, have dismissed it as charm school silliness, noting that it lacks the underlying philosophical absurdity to qualify as true experimental magic. Ironically, the spell is complex enough to require precision. A poorly cast Caninus results in half-feathered victims who merely sneeze loudly and glow yellow for several minutes. Neville Longbottom once tried it on Seamus Finnegan during their 6th year, and the result was described by Ginny Weasley as a deranged bumblebee with a voice like a boiling kettle. Madame Pumphrey, ever the patient healer, had to spend an hour de-chirping Seamus's vocal cords and reversing the colour from his skin. The spell's only redeeming quality, if one can call it that, lies in its theatricality. In the magical arts, as in Muggle theatre, spectacle has its place. Caninus serves as an act of magical slapstick, a reminder that not all spells must be serious or dangerous. It belongs to a class of magic that includes Tarantallegra, which causes uncontrollable dancing, and Rictusempra, the tickling charm. But even among these, Caninus remains especially absurd, transforming the body in a way that borders on the grotesque. One might imagine it being used as an act of protest or political satire, and indeed, there are unverified reports that a disgruntled clerk at the Department of Magical Games and Sports once cast it on his boss after being denied a promotion. The boss, temporarily transformed into a shrieking yellow blur, resigned a week later. The incident, of course, was covered up. The ministry has never confirmed it, but among lower-level employees, the Canary Revolt has achieved near mythical status. In magical literature, Caninus appears only in comedic works. The farcical tale, The Feathered Fiasco by Gilderoy Lockhart, features an enchanted mirror that turns its viewers into canaries when they attempt to preen before it. Lockhart, true to form, claims he barely escaped becoming the world's most handsome budgie. Critics dismissed the book as juvenile, and it remains one of his lowest-selling titles. Still, the inclusion of such a spell suggests that its presence in wizarding culture, though shallow, is persistent. Of all the Hogwarts professors, only Professor Trelawney has expressed vague approval of the spell, stating once during a divination lesson, "The canary symbolizes awakening, or perhaps transformation. It is no accident the feathers find you when your soul is ready to sing." The students, predictably, giggled. Lavender Brown found it poetic. Parvati Patil wrote a sonnet. But to the rest of the school it was yet another example of Trelawney's eccentricities. Yet the greatest mystery lies in why the spell continues to be passed down. Generations of students teach it to one another, preserving its strange legacy. It never appears on exams. It is not required for any NEWT subject. And yet somewhere, during the 5th or 6th year, someone whispers the incantation to a friend, giggles are exchanged, and soon the classroom is filled with feathers. Perhaps it endures because it is safe. In a world where magic often turns dangerous, where a miscast hex can cause permanent damage, Caninus is non-lethal, reversible, and embarrassing only to one's pride. It allows students to test their spell work without fear of harm. It is a rite of passage, wrapped in yellow plumage, a magical pie to the face that leaves no scar. Even the ghosts of Hogwarts have not been spared. The Fat Friar once floated through a flock of conjured canaries during a Hufflepuff prank gone awry. "I haven't felt so fluttery since my last sermon," he declared, laughing as spectral feathers fell through the floor. Nearly headless Nick, less amused, floated off with a haughty sniff, muttering about the declining standards of ghostly dignity. In truth, Caninus reflects a deeper aspect of wizarding life, the understanding that magic is not always solemn, not always sacred. It is also joy, mischief, and youthful defiance. The spell is a rebellion against the rigid expectations of magical society. It is the laughter that follows heartbreak, the joke that hides the tears, Hermione's use of it, for instance, wasn't just about revenge. It was her way of reclaiming power in a moment of emotional turmoil, of asserting herself through ridiculous, defiant magic. Still, if asked to justify the spell's presence in any serious magical repertoire, one would struggle. It does not heal or help, protect or reveal. It neither conceals truth nor brings it to light. It is spectacle without substance, noise without meaning, and yet therein lies its charm. In a world of dark lords and death curses, Canarius is the absurd reminder that magic can still be silly. One former Hogwarts prankster, now a retired broomstick designer named Eloise McManus, recalls casting Canarius on her potions professor in 1982. He called me a dunderhead. I called him a parrot. I got detention for a week, but the look on his face was worth it. Eloise keeps a framed feather from that day on her office wall. It is sun-bleached and fraying, but she says it brings her luck. Perhaps in the end, the spell survives, not despite its uselessness, but because of it. It reminds every young witch or wizard that magic is theirs to shape, that not every spell must carry the weight of the world. Some spells are meant to chirp, to rustle feathers, to paint the air with laughter. Canarius may never save a life or win a duel, but it will always win a smile. And perhaps when the dark clouds gather over the wizarding world, a smile is not such a small thing after all. Number 21, Arresto Momentum. In the ever-growing arsenal of magical spells known to the wizarding world, few incantations sound as promising and ultimately prove as disappointing as Arresto Momentum. On parchment, the spell's purpose is clear: to slow down the momentum of an object or person in rapid descent, ideally preventing injury or catastrophe. One might imagine it as a kind of magical parachute, a safeguard for reckless Quidditch players plummeting broomsticks or accidents on unstable castle staircases. But in practice, and more importantly within the canon of J.K. Rowling's richly built world, Arresto Momentum teeters between the dubious and the downright useless. When Harry Potter casts Arresto Momentum during the Triwizard Tournament, it should have been a moment of triumphant ingenuity. Faced with the sheer drop after retrieving the golden egg from the Hungarian horntail, Harry needed to descend safely and quickly. Harry pointed his wand at himself and shouted, "Arresto Momentum!" Goblet of Fire, Chapter 20. The result? A chaotic crash landing that left him bruised, battered, and breathless. He hit the ground on his back. It didn't break any bones, but it hurt. That, in essence, defines the spell's true performance. Better than nothing, but not by much. The spell's limitations become even more glaring when compared to the vast array of superior magical options already available to any competent witch or wizard. Take the levitation charm, Wingardium Leviosa. Taught to first years, it grants the caster precise control over an object's movement, including its speed and elevation. In the hands of a skilled user, it could gently lower a person to the ground with a level of control Arresto Momentum can't replicate. Why use a flawed cushion when you could use a floating lift? Then there's Accio, the summoning charm, one of the most versatile and powerful spells in the series. If a person or object is falling, summoning them to a specific place, perhaps into the caster's own arms or to a soft surface, is not only faster, but more reliable. When Harry uses Accio during the Triwizard Tournament to retrieve his firebolt, the broom soars to him across the castle grounds. The same charm could, in theory, be used to redirect a person's fall mid-air. The rules of magic in Rowling's world allow for such elasticity. Consider, too, the protective charms like Protego, which forms a magical barrier that absorbs impacts and curses. When modified, Protego can deflect physical force. In the final battle at Hogwarts, multiple characters are seen casting shield charms against oncoming spells and even debris. With some creative spellwork, Protego could be adapted to shield a falling person from the ground's unforgiving embrace. Once again, Arresto Momentum seems like a half measure in a world where full solutions already exist. Broomsticks, of course, dominate the airspace of the wizarding world. For a community so aerially inclined, the dependence on brooms makes Arresto Momentum even more redundant. Flying is a core skill, and falls are rare among practiced riders. When a broom malfunctions or a player is knocked off during Quidditch, skilled reflexes and enchanted stadiums often step in to prevent fatal injury. At Hogwarts, Professor McGonagall even cast a spell in Harry's first match to slow his descent after a bludger knocked him off his broom. Though the spell isn't named, it's likely something more powerful than Arresto Momentum, or at least more effective. Magical transportation methods also expose Arresto Momentum as the weak link. Apparition, Floo Powder, and Portkeys all eliminate the need for climbing or descending altogether. Why risk a fall when you can vanish from one location and reappear at another? Even within Hogwarts, where apparition is restricted, enchanted staircases, ghostly lifts, and even levitating objects make climbing and falling near obsolete. In such an environment, a spell designed to soften landings seems unnecessary, like teaching someone to fall gracefully in a world where no one falls. And yet, despite all this, Arresto Momentum was still taught and presumably practiced. This hints at a deeper issue, that some spells in the wizarding world exist not because they are essential, but because they reflect the magical culture's obsession with codifying every conceivable scenario, no matter how redundant. Wizards often rely on tradition rather than efficiency. Spells like Arresto Momentum survive not because they work well, but because they've always been around. Legacy magic, untouched by time or practicality. The spell's unreliability is not just anecdotal, it's systemic. In the Battle of the Department of Mysteries, when Harry and his friends are thrown into a chaotic melee, no one uses Arresto Momentum to save falling comrades. Instead, stunners, shields, and Accio dominate the scene. Even when Neville Longbottom tumbles from a high shelf, he doesn't slow himself magically, he crashes into the floor. Experienced fighters default to more trusted tools. If Arresto Momentum had real tactical value, we would have seen it there. A better example comes from the Battle of the Astronomy Tower. As Dumbledore falls to his death after being struck by Severus Snape's Avada Kedavra, there is a chilling moment of helplessness. No one, not even Snape or the Death Eaters, attempts to slow his fall. If Arresto Momentum could have worked, surely someone might have used it, even accidentally. The spell's absence in a moment so steeped in drama and magic is damning. It confirms that in life-or-death moments the spell isn't considered. Even within the Ministry of Magic, where security and safety should be paramount, there is no record of Arresto Momentum being used to prevent injuries during the many catastrophic events that occur throughout the series. When the Magic is Might statue collapses, or when the Ministry is infiltrated by Harry, Ron, and Hermione, people fall, things crash, but Arresto Momentum is never heard. Perhaps the spell simply can't handle real pressure. Some have argued that the spell is best suited for self-casting, a reflexive attempt to protect oneself. But even that falls flat under scrutiny. The time required to identify danger, retrieve one's wand, utter the incantation, and hope it works is often more than the time it takes to fall. Human reflexes are fast, but not that fast. In the Muggle world, it takes less than a second to hit the ground from a one-story fall. In that sliver of time, a wizard would need superhuman reaction speed to activate the spell. As Harry's Triwizard Plunge demonstrated, even when cast correctly, the results are lackluster. There's a telling irony in how the spell's name, Latin for halt momentum, promises such precision, yet its performance is more akin to shouting "slow down" at a runaway train. The discrepancy between name and effect undermines the trust wizards might place in it. Compare that to spells like Lumos or Alohomora, whose effects are simple and consistent. Those charms perform exactly as expected every time. Arresto Momentum fails in its primary role and stands as a cautionary tale of overpromising. Even in the realm of magical education, the spell has no prominent moment. It is never a focal point in defense against the dark arts, never emphasized by Flitwick charms, and never included in the practical albuels or notes. Students are taught hexes, counters, transfigurations, and even obscure jinxes, but Arresto Momentum is brushed aside. The curriculum seems to agree the spell is nice in theory, but not worth the effort. One wonders why it has survived at all, perhaps because it's visually dramatic. A wizard falling through the air and suddenly halting mid-drop makes for a cinematic image, but the books aren't driven by spectacle alone. The magic system Rowling created is one of logic, balance, and consequence. Every spell has rules, limits, and use cases. When one fails to meet its promise, it's quickly relegated to the back shelf of magical academia. The clearest indictment, though, lies in how the spell is never upgraded. Throughout the series, characters evolve their spell casting, learn new variations, and improve existing ones. Protego becomes Protego Maxima, and basic jinxes are refined into complex curses. But Arresto Momentum never grows. No Momentum Arrestum Maxima. No whispered improvements from advanced witches and wizards. It remains as it began, underwhelming. Ironically, the spell does make a brief appearance in the film adaptations, where it works better than in the books. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Professor Dumbledore uses Arresto Momentum to save Harry from a Quidditch fall. He floats to the ground gently, as if carried by invisible hands. It's a beautiful moment, but not canon. In the books, Harry crashes through the stands and lands hard. This discrepancy only deepens the frustration for readers. The spell could have worked, but it didn't. One might argue that the spell's mediocrity is part of its charm. Not all magic can be flawless. Just as the Muggle world is filled with ineffective gadgets and overhyped inventions, so too the wizarding world must have its share of duds. But in a society built around precision, safety, and centuries of magical refinement, keeping a spell as inconsistent as Arresto Momentum feels out of character. It's easy to imagine magical historians defending it, pointing to its roots in ancient spellbooks or its use in niche scenarios. Perhaps it works well with other charms or under specific lunar conditions, but if a spell requires a footnote and a full moon to be effective, it's not a spell worth teaching. Ultimately, Arresto Momentum is a relic, a magical seatbelt that only works when you don't really need it. In a world where children master levitation by age 11 and teenagers can summon objects across miles, relying on a charm that delivers partial results is laughable. The spell exists, yes, but like a worn-out broom in a modern Quidditch stadium, it's more museum piece than magic. Number 22. Jellify. There are spells that dazzle, that save lives, that are etched into the legendary annals of wizarding duels and dark history. And then there is Jellify, a spell so obscure, so hilariously impractical, that even the Half-Blood Prince, known for his sharp modifications of jinxes and curses, didn't bother annotating its effects in the margins. Its incantation is whispered with a smirk among Hogwarts students. Jellify, a charm that transforms solid surfaces into wobbly, translucent gelatin. Not a gelatinous mimic or a poisonous sludge. No, real jelly. The kind that quivers at a whisper, the kind that would sooner be found in honeydukes than in a battlefield. And yet the spell exists, buried in the footnotes of basic hexes for the Busy and Vexed, 5th edition, revised by Wilhelmina Woffington in 1873. She described it as a transfiguration-adjacent surface manipulation hex, useful for immobilizing trousers, spoiling carpets, and ruining formal occasions. The Ministry of Magic's Department of Experimental Magic once labeled it a non-lethal nuisance with potential household applications, which is the most generous thing ever said about it. There is, in fact, a recorded instance where Jellify was employed in a duel. Archibald Vole, a Ravenclaw of questionable wit but undeniable creativity, used it during a fourth-year Defense Against the Dark Arts tournament. His opponent, Frida Kemp, was known for her aggressive wand work and superior speed. Hoping to gain the upper hand, Vole cast Jellify on the stone platform beneath Frida's feet. The result? Mild tremors, some light amusement from the crowd, and a swift Petrificus totalis that sent Vole into the infirmary. Frida didn't so much slip as she did dance over the jelly like a practiced performer, and yet Archibald Vole's experiment with Jellify has earned the spell a niche cult status. There's something undeniably poetic about turning the battlefield into dessert. In a world of fire and fury, of cruciatus and inferi, what a curious counterbalance. Jellify, the spell that makes no one bleed, that never kills. If Avada Kedavra is the black stamp of death, Jellify is a pink giggle at its edge. No professor at Hogwarts has ever officially taught the spell. It's not on the OWL curriculum, nor NEWT level transfiguration. Even Professor Flitwick, who once called practical jokes the soul of spellwork, didn't include it in his dueling club demonstrations. It was rumoured that Fred and George Weasley discovered it not from a book, but from a bewitched chocolate frog card of Uric the Oddball, where he was seen bouncing on a jelly floor, cackling into his own beard. Uric himself is often associated with the earliest documented use of Jellify. According to the Compendium of Eccentric Enchantments, he once turned the floor of the Great Hall into jelly during the annual prefect's dinner. The head boy at the time, Septimus Hitchins, fell through 3 feet of raspberry wobble and emerged dripping and humiliated. Dumbledore later referenced this in passing, chuckling, "One can never be too cautious about dessert-based sabotage. Though the spell isn't complex to perform, its strength lies entirely in the timing and environment. It requires at least 4 seconds of continuous incantation, a swish-heavy wand movement, and direct contact with the target surface. Any interruption resets the effect. During a duel, this makes it nearly useless unless one's opponent is blind, deaf, and exceedingly patient. Its most effective use, as many agree, is not on the battlefield, but in the drawing room. There are rumours, unconfirmed but persistent, that Dolores Umbridge once had her office rug turned to lime jelly during an inspection by a vengeful Slytherin prankster. The hem of her fuchsia robes never recovered. Filch reportedly slipped while trying to mop it up and spent the afternoon shouting into the walls about wizardly perverts and dessert carpets. There's also the infamous dinner party of Euphemia Shacklebolt, aunt to Kingsley. In 1979, she hosted several prominent ministry officials at her Nottingdale estate. One of the guests, allegedly an embittered ex-suitor, cast Jellify on the marble floor beneath the buffet. Witnesses recall a catastrophic collapse of cauldrons filled with mulled pumpkin cider and a fully levitated swan party. When asked about it years later, Kingsley merely said, "Some magics are best left unspoken." Still, not all uses of Jellify are malicious. A small trend began in the late 1980s among eccentric wedding planners who began incorporating it into Muggle-themed wizard weddings. A Transfiguration Today column described a ceremony where the bride walked down a crimson jelly aisle. "She did not slip," the column clarified, "but every step left a delicate ripple in strawberry." Even Luna Lovegood once spoke of the spell with a strange sort of fondness. In an interview with the Quibbler, she said, "Jellify is the kind of magic that Thestrals might enjoy if they had birthdays. It's there, but only those with true sight see the joy in it." It was unclear whether she meant literal Thestrals or metaphorical ones, but it seemed oddly appropriate. In terms of defense, Jellify is the magical equivalent of a banana peel. It doesn't hurt, it humiliates. In the right context, it might stall a pursuer or send a chasing Death Eater careening into a wall. But what if the target is levitating? What if they're wearing dragon-hide boots with grip hexes? What if they simply jump? These are not small flaws, they are fatal ones, in the unforgiving logic of dueling. And yet spells like Jellify survive. Why? Because they remind us that magic is not just war and defense and dark corridors. It is, at its core, creative, emotional, silly. And in that silliness, perhaps there is a deeper magic than we realize, a spell that turns anger into laughter, pride into wobble. In the archives of the Department of Mysteries, one case file notes an unusual use of this spell. During a covert operation in 1994, a group of unspeakables used Jellify to soften the floor of a collapsing chamber deep under the North Sea. A mistake had been made in runic calculations, and the floor caved in. Had it remained stone, 6 agents might have died. But someone, name redacted, cast Jellify, turning the tiles into an elastic net that absorbed the impact. Sometimes comedy saves lives, but perhaps the strangest story comes from St. Mungo's. A long-term ward for magical mental distress once used Jellify as part of its therapy program. Patients were invited to cast it on small tiles and then walk barefoot across them, learning to trust movement and regain sensory engagement. "It wobbles, but it holds," said one healer. "It gives you fear, but also support, like life." It's easy to laugh at Jellify, to toss it aside like a bad joke, but there's something uniquely human about a spell that turns the hard and unyielding into softness. After all, How many spells do the opposite? Magic, more often than not, makes the flexible, rigid, binding, freezing, petrifying. Jellify rebels against that. It gives way, it jiggles, it invites mercy. One final case found in the memoirs of Tiberius Ogden describes a personal encounter with the spell. He'd been arguing with his wife, a talented charmcaster, over dinner. The argument grew heated, and in a fit of pique, she cast Jellify on his armchair. When he sat down, he sank halfway into raspberry wobble. The result? They both laughed. The fight ended. "Jelly," he wrote, "may be nature's way of asking us to take ourselves less seriously. So no, you're unlikely to find Jellify used in a duel against a Death Eater. Snape would never waste a breath on it. McGonagall would arch an eyebrow so sharp it might slice the spell in two. But in the world of magic, where so much seeks to dominate or destroy, there is space, must be space, for spells that only want to wobble, to giggle, to jiggle their way into our memory. And if you ever find yourself at an uncomfortable family dinner with a smug cousin or judgmental in-law, perhaps you'll remember Jellify, not to harm, just to remind them, gently, humiliatingly, that not everything must be serious, that sometimes, even in the most rigid of moments, the floor can be jelly. Number 23, Scourgify. Some spells inspire awe, some save lives. And then there's Scourgify, a spell so singular in its purpose that one can't help but wonder, why does it even exist? Scourgify is a cleaning charm, designed, of all things, for removing slime. That's right, slime. Not blood, not cursed residue, not even goblin-made rust, just common, revolting, viscous, slippery slime. And while that might sound marginally useful to someone knee-deep in flobberworm mucus, the truth is that in the vast ocean of magical possibilities, Scourgify floats aimlessly like a piece of soapsuds. It's hard to escape the sense that this spell exists only to fill a page in the Standard Book of Spells Grade 1. The spell is first demonstrated with notable mediocrity when Nymphadora Tonks uses it in Order of the Phoenix to clean a glass in the Dursleys' kitchen. The moment is brief and oddly unsatisfying. Tonks waved her wand at the mug and said, "Scourgify." The dried-on egg and bacon vanished. Practical? Certainly. Impressive? Not remotely. It leaves the reader wondering why bother mastering a charm that scrubs off breakfast grease when the wizarding world offers far more versatile magic. The redundancy of Scourgify becomes apparent when one considers its competitor, Evanesco, the Vanishing spell. Unlike Scourgify, which only cleans, Evanesco completely vanishes the object or substance in question. Used by Professor McGonagall to remove piles of parchment, and by Dobby to clean up messes with unnerving speed, it offers a cleaner, simpler solution. If slime is the problem, Evanesco is the obvious cure. So why did some overzealous spellwright feel the need to design a specialized mucus-banishing charm? It's easy to imagine a neurotic wizard, perhaps centuries ago, driven mad by the gelatinous trail of a magical slug infestation. This poor soul, unable to rest until every inch of his home was purged of slime, may have locked himself in his tower with nothing but his wand, a few basic incantations, and an obsessive hatred for sticky substances. Thus, Scourgify was born, not from necessity, but from discomfort and obsessive compulsion. There's something almost comedic about the idea. In a universe where dragons soar through the skies and wands can mend bones, someone decided the highest use of magic was cleaning goo. It's hard to find another spell with such a niche purpose. Even Reparo, a spell used by virtually every wizard and witch from first years to ministry officials, offers an elegant solution to broken objects. Scourgify, meanwhile, feels like the magical equivalent of a single-function kitchen gadget. It's not even taught with enthusiasm. Unlike Alohomora, which opens locked doors, or Lumos, which brings light to darkness, Scourgify isn't given a spotlight in the classroom. It's relegated to utility. At best, it's a footnote in a lesson, the spell equivalent of learning how to clean the bathroom. Not exactly what young witches and wizards dream about when they receive their Hogwarts letter. There are those who might argue that even a small spell has its place. After all, house elves use Scourgify regularly, and it's been included in the ministry's magical housekeeping manuals. But let's be honest, when even house elves, creatures capable of disapparating mid-sneeze and overpowering powerful wizards, are using a spell not because it's efficient, but because tradition demands it, something is off. Why not update the standard? Why not adopt a better, more versatile charm? Even the name is uninspiring, Scourgify. It sounds like something an angry matron would shout at a misbehaving cauldron. There's no elegance to it. Compare that to the lyrical Expecto Patronum or the thunderous Expelliarmus. Scourgify lands with a splat, a wet, slimy, unimpressive splat. Ironically, the spell's most notable appearance in the books is when it's used as punishment. In Order of the Phoenix, Professor Snape uses Scourgify to wash out Harry's mouth after he lashes out verbally. The spell, instead of helping, becomes a tool of humiliation. "Scourgify!" Snape bellowed, and Harry felt something cold and wet hit him in the face. It was a jet of soapy water. The next moment he was coughing and spluttering. Even here the spell isn't noble, it's a weaponized mop, a magical slap with a soapy sponge. One would think that a spell designed for cleaning could have at least been developed into something grander. A charm for purifying cursed wounds, or sanitizing a potion's residue. But no, Scourgify remains forever tethered to its humble, unimpressive purpose, cleaning gunk. It's not difficult to imagine better uses for a cleaning charm. What if Scourgify had been engineered to target dark magic stains or toxic potion fumes? What if, with a single flick, it could remove evidence of a magical duel gone wrong? Instead, it's been left behind in the dust of more ambitious charms, forgotten, a relic of a less imaginative age. Think about the number of spells that overlap in function but outshine Scourgify. Tergeo, for instance, is far more graceful. Hermione uses it in Half-Blood Prince to siphon blood from Harry's face, efficient, silent, precise. There's no bubbling foam, no slap of wetness, just magic doing its job. Why learn Scourgify when Tergeo exists? Even within the Hogwarts syllabus, students are encouraged to develop flexibility in spell usage. Charms classes under Professor Flitwick emphasize creativity, using spells in new, clever ways. No one has ever been rewarded for using Scourgify in a duel. No clever improvisation, no glorious rescue has ever depended on its use. There's also the uncomfortable realization that Scourgify seems almost designed for people who refuse to use their hands. When Molly Weasley casts it to clean her children's messes, it's done with an air of weary routine. There's no joy in it. It's a mother's groan transfigured into a charm. Scourgify is not a spell of discovery or protection. It's a spell of exhaustion. There's no great inventor credited with it, no legendary witch or wizard known for popularizing Scourgify. Compare that to Sectum Sempra, invented by Severus Snape, or Muffliato, co-created by Marauders. These spells carry names and stories. Scourgify, it's anonymous, a spell without a legacy. The Ministry hasn't even bothered to regulate it. There are strict rules for the use of spells like Obliviate or Imperio, but Scourgify? No need. Its power is so limited, so contained, that it poses no danger to anyone, not even to pride. The worst it can do is cause embarrassment during cleaning duty. If there were a wizarding contest for most anticlimactic spell, Scourgify would sweep the floor, literally. The only other charm that comes close might be Waddiwasi, which shoots gum up a nose. But even Waddiwasi has flair. Scourgify simply dissolves, leaving behind a sterile silence. Worse yet, it's often confused for a beginner's spell, yet it demands precision. If improperly cast, it can soak everything in sight. An overzealous Scourgify has been known to drench rooms, and more than one young student at Hogwarts has walked away from a botched attempt looking like they lost a fight with a mop bucket. That may be the greatest insult of all. Scourgify isn't even easy. It doesn't reward effort with elegance. It rewards effort with soggy floors and grumpy cats. One could argue that even magical cleaning is best left to Muggle methods. Perhaps the true tragedy of Scourgify is its permanence in the spellbook. Despite its awkward name, niche function, and lack of poetic resonance, it remains, printed and memorized. It takes up precious space where something more daring, more useful, could dwell. One wonders what brilliant incantation was forgotten so that slime could be scrubbed from history. It may be time to retire it. Let Scourgify slip quietly into magical obscurity, its purpose overtaken by better spells, its utility questioned, its history forgotten. Let it be a lesson. Not all magic is created equal. Some charms soar, others, well, they just clean slime. Would the wizarding world be any less magical without it? Probably not, but it might be just a little drier, a little less soapy, and a whole lot more impressive. Number 24, Colloportus. In a world where dragons breathe fire, time can be turned with a delicate hourglass, and souls are torn from bodies with a single curse. One might expect every spell to be as powerful and useful as the next. And yet, hidden among the sparks and shadows of the wizarding world, there lies a spell so underwhelming, so lacking in practical purpose, that even seasoned witches and wizards hesitate to remember its incantation. Colloportus, a spell intended to lock doors, finds itself overshadowed by nearly every other defensive enchantment in magical history. At first glance, Colloportus seems rather helpful. A quick wave of the wand, a confident utterance, and the door before you slams shut and seals. For a young wizard seeking to delay a pursuer, it offers a moment of false safety. But therein lies the problem. It is only a moment, fleeting and easily undone. Because in a world where knowledge of magic is widespread, there is always someone nearby with the key. Alohomora, the unlocking charm. Even Hermione Granger, the brightest witch of her age, mastered Alohomora in her first year at Hogwarts. "Alohomora!" she cried, opening the door on the forbidden third-floor corridor where Fluffy, the three-headed dog, waited. The effectiveness of the unlocking spell was so simple, so instantaneous, that it rendered Colloportus nearly useless. What point is there in sealing a door if a 12-year-old can open it with a flick and a whisper? Hogwarts itself is a fortress of magical enchantments, doors that don't respond to physical locks at all, staircases that move on a whim, and secret entrances that yield only to passwords, riddles, or magical objects. The Colloportus charm is utterly powerless in such a place. Try it on the door to the room of requirement, and it would laugh, if doors could laugh, and simply disappear, rendering your efforts moot. The spell is, frankly, primitive. It lacks the defensive layers found in other wards or protections. A door locked with Colloportus can be unlocked with equal ease by Alohomora, bypassed entirely with Aparecium if the location permits it, or even blasted apart by something as crude as the Reducto curse. The magical world is not held together by such brittle barriers. It is layered in concealment, protection, and misdirection. Consider the case of Sirius Black's escape from the tower in Hogwarts. If all it took to secure him was a locked door, surely Colloportus would have been sufficient. But magical security requires more. Enchantments that sense intent, that bind the very air, that recognize the wand signature of the caster. Colloportus has no such depth. It is a child's lock in an adult world. Even within the Ministry of Magic, security goes far beyond locked doors. Auras do not rely on charms that can be undone by schoolchildren. They use wards, trace spells, anti-apparition fields, and magical detection webs. When Mad-Eye Moody was kidnapped, his captors used complex enchantments to hold him, not a mere door lock. To trust Colloportus in such scenarios is to trust a paper shield against fire. There is a certain irony to the spell's presence in the lexicon of taught charms. It is mentioned in the Standard Book of Spells Grade 2, which makes sense. It is safe to practice, causes no real damage, and gives young students a sense of accomplishment. But that is precisely its limit. It is an academic toy. Beyond the classroom, it offers little that a wizard of true power would ever need. Think of the Department of Mysteries, its spinning rooms and echoing corridors. Not once do we hear a door being locked with Colloportus. The spells used there are of another caliber entirely. When the door to the Veil Chamber closes, it does so with the finality of forgotten magic, not with the schoolyard mumblings of Colloportus. In fact, the only time Colloportus is seen in action is in Order of the Phoenix, when Hermione uses it to try and block pursuing Death Eaters. "Colloportus!" she yells, slamming doors behind her. But even then, it is laughably ineffective. The Death Eaters open them as easily as they were shut. There is no triumph in the spell, only desperation. And that is what Colloportus ultimately represents, a brief illusion of control in a world where power lies in subtler, stronger hands. To further highlight its inadequacy, one need only compare it to the array of truly protective spells available. The imperturbable charm used by Molly Weasley to prevent eavesdropping creates an invisible barrier that even extends to sound. The Protego charm, though not designed for doors, forms a shield of defensive magic that can repel curses and attackers alike. Even Muffliato, which fills the ears of others with buzzing, is more useful for stealth than Colloportus is for protection. Moreover, spells like Homenum Revelio, Salvio Hexia, and Fianto Duri can reinforce locations, detect intruders, and even strengthen barriers. These are the spells of grown witches and war-trained wizards. Colloportus is a footnote, a relic from the early pages of a textbook destined to be forgotten once real danger arises. Let us imagine a more realistic scenario. Suppose Harry and his friends are being chased through the corridors of the Ministry by Death Eaters. If Hermione were to turn and cast Colloportus on a door, what would happen? Nothing useful. The Death Eaters, armed with both Alohomora and far deadlier curses, would breach it in seconds, and while the door was briefly sealed, the time it bought them would be minimal. A breath, a heartbeat. Is that what defense amounts to? Contrast this with the complex enchantments guarding Grimmauld Place. The Fidelius charm, which hides a location entirely from view, is so powerful that even Dumbledore cannot share the secret unless he is the secret keeper. In such a context, Colloportus is less than a whisper. It is background noise. Even in domestic life, its value is questionable. Would a wizard secure his home with Colloportus, knowing any teenage mischief-maker could undo it? Would a witch place her valuables behind a Colloportus-sealed door, trusting that spell alone? It is unlikely. Magical homes are layered with enchantments, some responsive to bloodlines, others to passwords or artifacts. The world is too dangerous for such simplicity. It is almost as if Colloportus exists not to protect, but to teach. It introduces the concept of magical interference with physical objects, of changing the state of the environment with thought and will. But it was never meant to be the final word on security. Its usefulness ends where experience begins. And yet, despite all of this, the spell remains in the curriculum. It is spoken aloud in classrooms, practiced in corridors, and remembered by those who learned it early. Perhaps that is the only reason it survives tradition. Like cursive writing in the Muggle world or using a quill instead of a pen, its value is symbolic rather than practical. The wizarding world has evolved, but Colloportus has not. It lingers on the tongues of novices, never aging, never maturing, while the world around it grows more dangerous and complex. It is the magical equivalent of locking your door with a thread and hoping the wolf outside won't push too hard. Even Fred and George Weasley, known for exploiting magical shortcuts, never bothered with Colloportus. Their creations, Peruvian instant darkness powder, shield hats, and extendable ears, offer more protection and subterfuge than that single word ever could. They knew that innovation beats tradition, especially when safety is at stake. When Snape flees from Hogwarts after Dumbledore's death, there is no mention of Colloportus being used to trap him. The teachers, aware of its limitations, rely on more powerful and meaningful magic. In war, there is no room for half measures. And in the rising tension of the wizarding world, every second, every incantation must count. So what remains of Colloportus? It is a charm of nostalgia, a spell that comforts with its familiarity. It is the magical equivalent of checking the locks before bed, even when your house is protected by a dozen alarms and wards. It makes you feel safe, but safety is not its gift. Illusion is. And illusion, as every witch and wizard must eventually learn, is a dangerous thing to trust, especially when the dark is real and knocking. Number 25, Glabberforce. In the vast lexicon of spells scattered throughout the wizarding world, there are charms that change the course of history, hexes that decide the fate of a duel, and enchantments that keep the magical and non-magical worlds from colliding. And then there's Glabberforce, a name that inspires more raised eyebrows than raised wands. This peculiar, rarely mentioned charm holds a strange, almost comic place among the grander tools of witchcraft and wizardry. A spell designed to make any pair of shoes slippery as greased ice might sound like the setup to a joke in a Weasley's Wizard Wheezes catalogue, but Glabberforce is indeed a real, if utterly impractical, entry in the spellbooks of yesteryear. Its origin is murky. Some magical historians believe it was first created by a minor prankster wizard of the 17th century named Mervyn Thatch, who allegedly tested it on the footwear of an entire delegation of goblins during a wizarding conference in Somerset. According to scattered accounts, the goblins fell into chaos, slipping and stumbling into tables of pumpkin juice and cauldron cakes. The resulting embarrassment nearly derailed goblin-wizard negotiations for a decade. After that, the spell faded into obscurity, noted only in niche tomes like Derwent Shimpling's unusually useless enchantments. The spell's mechanics are straightforward. One aims a wand at the target's footwear, speaks Glabberforce clearly and with intent, and waits for the reaction. If successful, the enchanted shoes lose all friction, causing the wearer to slide as if treading a floor covered in oil. The results can range from mildly inconvenient to mildly amusing. It never achieves more than that. No explosions, no sparks, no visible glow, just awkward shuffling, stifled laughter, and a general loss of dignity. Even Fred and George Weasley, the high priests of magical mischief, are not recorded to have used Glabberforce in their well-documented arsenal of tricks and traps. When asked once, in a post-war interview published in the Daily Prophet, George laughed and said, "Glabberforce? Blimey, I think we tried it once on a garden gnome. Poor thing just spun around in circles until it fell asleep." That about sums up its practical application. The spell has virtually no offensive or defensive value. In a duel, where speed and precision determine the outcome, taking the time to aim at someone's feet with a spell that might or might not activate is laughable. It requires a clear line of sight, a stationary target, and more luck than skill. Compare this to Impedimenta, which reliably hinders a foe regardless of where they're hit. The Standard Book of Spells Grade 3 describes Impedimenta as capable of halting an opponent's motion, blocking a charge, or delaying pursuit. Glabberforce, by contrast, isn't even mentioned. One might argue that it has comedic potential. That's fair. But in the realm of comedy, even spells like Rictusempra, the tickling charm, are more successful. They provoke a reaction, disrupt focus, and can create chaos in the right hands. Glabberforce causes momentary instability unless the target is barefoot, levitating, or, like most experienced duelists, wearing dragon hide boots resistant to minor charms. The spell slides off them, quite literally. There is only one known recorded use of Glabberforce in a real confrontation, and even that ended in farce. During a student duel at Hogwarts sometime in the 1980s, a Hufflepuff named Cyril Trumbull reportedly cast it on a Slytherin prefect's boots during a friendly practice match in the courtyard. The prefect wobbled, lost balance, and fell into the nearby pond. Laughter erupted, but Professor Flitwick was less than amused. Cyril received 2 weeks of detention and a stern lecture on responsible spell usage. No one took the spell seriously after that. In a world full of transformative, protective, and even lethal magic, the existence of a spell like Glabberforce feels almost like a mistake, a scribble in the margins of magical innovation. Some believe it was created not for combat or utility, but for pure satire. Others suggest it might have been a prototype for more advanced enchantments related to object manipulation. Perhaps it was intended to be part of a suite of household spells like Scourgify or Reparo, but was discarded for being too unreliable. The incantation itself is awkward. Glabberforce does not roll off the tongue. It doesn't sound elegant or commanding like Expelliarmus or Alohomora. Instead, it feels clunky, as if the syllables are at war with each other. Its phonetics lack the flowing cadence that often characterizes successful spells. This contributes to the difficulty in casting it correctly. Even the renowned charms professor, Phileas Flitwick, is rumored to have described it in private as a linguistic pothole in the road of spellcasting. Adding to its absurdity is the fact that the spell doesn't alter the shoe's appearance. The rubberizing effect is invisible. A pair of polished Oxfords, upon being hit with Glabberforce, remains visually unchanged. This makes it hard to know whether the spell has succeeded until the victim takes a step, and by then the spell's caster may have already been disarmed or stunned. There's a whimsical detail found in an old appendix of magical mishaps and how to reverse them, where a wizard named Elmer Greel allegedly used Glabberforce on his own shoes in an attempt to ice skate down the corridors of St. Mungo's. He ended up colliding with a trolley of medical potions, causing a mild explosion and a week-long ban from the 3rd floor. His experiment was cited as an example of reckless personal endangerment by charm misuse. The spell also fares poorly in controlled environments. In tests conducted at the Department of Experimental Magic in the 1990s, it was shown to have a success rate of only 58%, even under ideal conditions. It doesn't work on shoes already enchanted with any form of protective spellwork. Enchanted footwear, like Luna Lovegood's Spectre Specs boosted boots or specialized aura boots, completely resist Glabberforce. It is, in essence, a spell that works best on unsuspecting first years wearing second-hand loafers. Interestingly, Peeves the Poltergeist found a use for it during his infamous prank spree of 1974. According to the Hogwarts archives of magical mayhem, he once enchanted the staff's shoe cupboard, causing several professors, including a particularly livid Professor Kettleburn, to skate through the Great Hall mid-breakfast. The incident ended with spilled porridge, a broken goblet, and Headmaster Dippet banning all poltergeist magic in faculty quarters. It is perhaps Glabberforce's only claim to fame. The spell was never taught at Hogwarts in the official curriculum. It appears in no Alwell or Newt examinations, and is absent from most standard textbooks. One obscure volume, Charms You'll Never Need, but might want to try, includes it as a footnote to the chapter on novelty enchantments. It reads, Glabberforce, when banana peels aren't magical enough. That speaks volumes about its standing in the magical community. Attempts to find new uses for Glabberforce have been largely unsuccessful. Some magical pranksters have experimented with using it on broomsticks, hoping to create a disorienting effect in Quidditch, but the spell doesn't bind to wood. Others tried applying it to carpets with the hope of creating a slip-slide floor for parties, but the charm's magic remains stubbornly footwear-specific. There is a rumor that Argus Filch once attempted to learn Glabberforce, believing it might deter students from running in the halls. However, being a squib, he couldn't cast it, and the mere idea of students sliding about likely angered him further. He confiscated the book he found it in and locked it away in the restricted section, where it gathered dust beside enchantments for the eternally bored and spells that won't impress anyone. Even among collectors of obscure magic, Glabberforce holds little value. There is no recorded wand-maker who claims to have tested cores or woods specifically to enhance the charm. No magical duel champion has ever cited it as a secret weapon, and no teacher, not even the unconventional Professor Trelawney, has tried to claim it has prophetic significance. It is, by all measures, the most unremarkable spell to have survived in memory. Yet perhaps that is what makes it oddly endearing. In a universe full of world-ending curses and deadly dark magic, there's something strangely comforting in the existence of a spell whose worst consequence is a bruised bottom and wounded pride. Glabberforce serves as a reminder that magic, for all its power, also has room for whimsy, nonsense, and the occasional banana peel moment. No student would study Glabberforce hoping to pass an exam. No aura would bring it into a standoff. But maybe, just maybe, a young witch or wizard might stumble upon it in an old, dusty volume, try it out on a friend's shoes, and erupt into laughter as their companion skates wildly across the room. And in that laughter there might be a kind of magic, that no duel or prophecy can match. Magic doesn't always need purpose to be magical. Glabberforce may never save a life, win a battle, or reveal a mystery. But it has a story, a history, a brief moment of mischief in the grand, sweeping saga of spells. And that, in the end, is worth remembering. Number 26. Enago. There are spells in the wizarding world that dazzle the imagination. Charms that unlock ancient doors, curses that can twist a soul, hexes that immobilize your enemies, and enchantments so powerful they bend the laws of nature. And then there's Enago, a spell so absurd, so tragically hilarious in its execution, that even the most eccentric of wizards might hesitate before using it. A charm that makes water gush from the target's nose, not a sneeze, not a sniffle. A relentless, humiliating nasal fountain. The spell Enago, sometimes mentioned in jest in the back pages of the Daily Prophet or in the Weasleys' joke catalogues, has always hovered on the outskirts of magical respectability. Unlike Petrificus Totalis or Expelliarmus, it doesn't offer any real defense, offense, or even practical household application. In fact, its very existence in spellbooks seems to be the magical equivalent of a scribble in the margins, a note made in bad taste, left there as a dare, and somehow passed down through centuries of magical education. The only known time the spell was cast in an educational setting was during a rogue moment in the corridors of Hogwarts. According to a footnote in a forgotten edition of Hogwarts, a history, a Ravenclaw 5th year named Merton Swindlehurst cast Enago on a Slytherin prefect in 1892 after an argument over the proper pronunciation of Aparecium. Swindlehurst, who had a peculiar sense of humour and a strong stomach for detentions, later claimed he merely wanted to enhance the aquatic ambience of the dungeons. The Slytherin prefect, a girl named Cordelia Blaine, retaliated with a furunculus hex that left Merton covered in boils for a week. That was the last time Enago was recorded in an academic duel. Why then would such a spell exist in the first place? Unlike charms that influence physical movement or transfigure objects, Enago serves no purpose outside of sheer humiliation. It cannot incapacitate, it cannot defend. Its effect is more emotional than strategic, targeting the dignity of the victim rather than their safety. It's a prank masquerading as magic, a child's scribble on the tapestry of enchantment. The spell's lack of utility is not due to oversight. Wizards and witches, through the centuries, have documented its effects and tried, with little success, to justify its inclusion in spellbooks. A notable attempt came from Euphemia Tigg, a minor spell theorist of the 17th century, who included Enago in her collection Hexes for the Playful Mind. She proposed it might be useful during interrogations or diplomatic meetings to unnerve an opponent with an unexpected display of nasal rainfall. The wizarding community, however, met her theory with amused disdain. Her book was quietly shelved and eventually went out of print. Even Gilderoy Lockhart, who once boasted of using a yeti as a footstool, never dared claim Enago as part of his colourful repertoire. There is, however, one semi-canonical reference that fans of the series might recognise, albeit hidden in plain sight. During the Quidditch World Cup in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, when the Weasleys, Harry and Hermione camp in the wizarding tents, Arthur Weasley recalls a spell used at a past match by a drunken wizard that caused another spectator's nostrils to become miniature geysers. Though not named directly, many believe this was a use of Enago, or a variation of it. The result was chaos, laughter, and a very wet set of robes. In the battlefields of the Second Wizarding War, spells were chosen for precision and power. The Order of the Phoenix didn't train in Enago, nor did the Death Eaters include it in their arsenal of pain and fear. Imagine a duel between Bellatrix Lestrange and Molly Weasley, one launching deadly curses with dark delight, the other defending with maternal rage, and suddenly Enago is cast, resulting in one of them sputtering waterfalls from their nose. It breaks the tension, certainly, but not in a way that helps win the battle. In a world where a second's hesitation means death, no one dares rely on a joke spell. Even Fred and George Weasley, masters of magical mischief, rarely mention Enago in their detailed catalogues. Their products brim with puking pastilles, canary creams and tongue-ton taffy, all designed to shock but also to create real results. The charm that causes nasal flooding, in contrast, is clumsy, hard to aim, hard to time, easy to counter, and worst of all, too ridiculous even for them. That isn't to say Enago is completely devoid of impact. There is one case buried in the criminal records at the Department of Magical Law Enforcement where a wizard by the name of Crispin Muldoon used the charm during a robbery gone wrong. When cornered in the alley behind Slug and Jiggers, Muldoon turned and hit his pursuer, a young Aura, with Enago. The Aura, startled, stumbled back, trying to control the twin torrents of water streaming from his nose. Muldoon escaped, only to be caught later when he slipped on a puddle of his own making. The Aura's report, written in soaked ink, simply read utterly absurd and unhelpful. Hogwarts professors, of course, know of the spell. Flitwick, that tiny professor with an ear for musical laughter, once jokingly demonstrated it during a dueling club meeting, sending a puff of water from Neville Longbottom's nose to general amusement. But even he cautioned, a spell is only as useful as the moment allows, and very few moments require this one. Some theorists have postulated that the spell is a magical mutation, a side effect or byproduct of an older, more useful charm. There are murmurs in old Celtic tomes that suggest Enago may have originated from a water-conjuring spell used for healing sinus ailments, but something in its phrasing, a mispronunciation perhaps, turned healing into havoc. And rather than correct the spell, wizards did what they often do with mistakes. They gave it a name, laughed about it, and moved on. And yet, despite its foolishness, Enago remains. Like a bad song you can't get out of your head, it persists in whispers, giggles, and the occasional classroom dare. During their time at Hogwarts, both James Potter and Sirius Black were rumoured to have used it liberally on unsuspecting students. One poor Hufflepuff allegedly sneezed water for 3 days. Madame Pomfrey, furious, banned both boys from the hospital wing until they apologised. It is tempting to imagine a world where Enago might be deadly, perhaps used in combination with other charms to drown a target or to obscure vision in the heat of battle. But such speculations quickly become dark, and the essence of Enago resists such seriousness. It is not a spell of war, it is a spell of whimsy, of chaos without consequence. Its very uselessness defines it. Even the Ministry of Magic, ever the bureaucratic machine, once considered banning the spell under the misinformation and irresponsible use of Magic Act. But in a rare moment of humour, the committee chair, Madame Bletchley, declared, "We shall not ban what is already banned by reason and good taste." The room laughed, the vote was dismissed, and Enago was allowed to remain in the dusty corners of spellbooks and the minds of schoolchildren. Of course, the absurdity of Enago has also led some Muggle-born wizards to wonder whether it was created specifically to mock Muggle sensibilities. After all, to the uninitiated, magic itself is fantastical. Why not add a bit of toilet humour to the mix? But the theory falls apart under scrutiny. Muggles may enjoy a good joke, but they would hardly invent a spell so complex in structure for such a silly result. It is, truly, a product of the magical mind, brilliant, creative, and at times utterly unhinged. The irony of Enago is that while it fails at usefulness, it succeeds as a mirror. It reflects the extremes of the magical community, its love for spectacle, its unquenchable thirst for the bizarre, and its comfort with the nonsensical. No Muggle would think to craft such a spell. Only a world where dragons and goblins exist could produce a charm that turns a nose into a garden hose. In many ways, Enago reminds us that magic is not always about power. Sometimes it is about absurdity. In the same way Zonko's joke shop thrives on giggles and surprise, Enago is a relic of magical childhood. The kind of spell whispered at slumber parties in Ravenclaw towers or practiced in mirrors by Gryffindors bored of homework. It is part of the cultural tapestry, even if it has no place in serious spellwork. And though Hermione Granger, champion of logic and practicality, would likely scoff at the charm's existence, A waste of one movement, she might say. Even she might smile at the thought of Ron Weasley accidentally hitting himself with it. In a world so often darkened by prophecy and war, a spell like Enago is a reminder that even magic needs to laugh. What's more, Enago teaches restraint. Every young witch and wizard must learn that not all spells should be cast, not all knowledge should be used, and not all power is worth the wand's flick. In that sense, Enago is the ultimate test of maturity. To know it exists, to resist the urge, and to realize that just because one can summon a nasal monsoon doesn't mean one should. In the end, perhaps Enago is not so useless. After all, it has no place in battle, nor in healing, nor in creation or defense. But it does hold a place in magical history, as a footnote, a cautionary tale, and a joke shared among the halls of Hogwarts. And maybe, just maybe, that is enough. Number 27, Cavetier. Among the tapestry of spells that dance through the pages of the Harry Potter saga, from the elegance of Wingardium Leviosa to the sheer destruction of Avada Kedavra, there exist magical utterances so obscure and underwhelming that one questions whether even a bored student would bother to whisper them. One such spell is Cavetier, a charm so pitifully insignificant that it barely earns a mention in any curriculum, grimoire, or battle plan. It creates a shallow hole in the ground. That's it. No explosion, no magical eruption, no mystical shimmer, just a neat, uninspired dent in the earth, a pathetic pockmark on the soil, as though a lazy gnome had sneezed. Perhaps the first and last recorded official use of Cavetier was by Xenophilius Lovegood, who swore by its efficiency in planting Gurdy roots in a fashion that honors the lunar alignment. He demonstrated this during the 1997 Moonseed Festival in Ottery St. Catchpole. He waved his wand dramatically, chanted Cavetier, and produced 6 thumb-sized craters in the ground. The audience clapped out of courtesy. One child asked if he could sit in one. The spell, according to Xenophilius, aligned perfectly with the 7th rune of Baldrin's soil theory, something he invented, probably 5 minutes earlier. Even Neville Longbottom, who once famously blew up a greenhouse accidentally by sneezing while holding dragon dung fertilizer, admitted that Cavetier was just not worth the wrist movement. And Neville loved dirt. He'd dig through dragon-manured soil, kneel in doxy-infested moss, and smile while being scratched by Devil's Snare. But Cavetier? No, thank you. He preferred a good trowel, a gloved hand, or the good old herbivicus to get things growing. As he once noted in herbology class, this spell feels like trying to butter toast with a feather. The Ministry of Magic once considered classifying Cavetier under domestic charms non-essential, right next to a lesser-known spell that polished doorknobs, Politura. The only reason Cavetier wasn't removed entirely from the official compendium was due to a petition signed by exactly 4 wizards, 3 of whom were professional gnome watchers, and one who later admitted he thought the spell helped with back pain. Nowhere in the battles of Hogwarts did a student raise their wand and cry, Cavetier, not when Death Eaters stormed the castle, not when Bellatrix Lestrange howled curses through the Great Hall, not even when Professor Sprout led an army of mandrakes into battle did anyone suggest digging small holes as a strategic advantage. There's simply no tactical use, said Kingsley Shacklebolt during a post-war debrief, unless the enemy is exactly 3 inches tall and standing very still over loose soil. Hermione Granger, who memorized every spell in the Standard Book of Spells series, including the footnotes, confessed she only cast Cavetier once. I thought it might help bury a time capsule, she said years later. But the hole was so small I could barely fit a galleon inside, let alone an enchanted diary. She filled it in with her shoe and never cast the spell again. Ron laughed about it for weeks. For Cavetier, he said once, sounds like something you do when you eat too much pudding. The sad truth is that Cavetier doesn't just suffer from being unimpressive. It's fundamentally outdated. Wizards don't need to dig tiny holes. With magic, entire landscapes can be transformed. When Hagrid needed to create a new paddock for a Scroot, he simply used Tergeo to clear the ground, and Evanesco to vanish boulders. Even Fred and George, known for using magic for the most ludicrous ends, never saw the point. In a letter Fred once wrote to Lee Jordan, he joked, "If you ever want to impress a girl, cast Cavetier, then watch her walk away to date someone who can conjure fire whiskey." Even in the academic corridors of Hogwarts, Cavetier had no place. Professor Flitwick, Master of Charms, skipped the spell entirely. During a rare interview he confessed that he found it embarrassingly dull. He once tried using it to start a magical excavation unit for first years, but the spell's slow effect and minimal result caused more frustration than learning. "One girl wept," he said, "because her hole didn't look as nice as the boy next to her. I realized then this spell causes emotional damage." A student named Bertram Aubrey once tried to use Cavetier to prank his friend by digging a shallow trap outside the Gryffindor common room. The hole was so insignificant that the friend merely stepped over it. The prank failed spectacularly. Bertram was later the target of a vastly more successful Jellylegs Jinx in retaliation. His shallow spell became a metaphor for shallow thinking. Nor does Cavetier fare well in household use. Consider Molly Weasley, who enchanted her entire kitchen to slice, boil, clean, and knit socks, all without lifting a wand. When asked in a Witch Weekly interview if she ever used Cavetier for planting, she replied, "Oh, Merlin's beard, no. Why cast a spell when you can flick your wand and have the whole garden tilled in 10 seconds? She added, "Arthur tried it once. Dug a tiny hole, lost his ring inside. Took 3 hours to get it back." Some scholars tried to defend Cavetier by arguing that it promotes mindfulness. A meditation group in Diagon Alley briefly adopted the spell as part of their Earthen Awakening series. Wizards would kneel in a circle, chant Cavetier, and stare at their little dirt dents in silence. It lasted 3 sessions. One member described the experience as emotionally shallow. There are, of course, theoretical applications, but they're so theoretical they collapse under scrutiny. Could Cavetier be used to trip someone? Perhaps, but only if they were blindfolded and running downhill. Could it help locate buried treasure? Only if the treasure lay exactly 3 inches below the surface and didn't require tools or real effort. In short, if you needed to dig out a pixie's secret stash of buttons, Cavetier might help, but so could a spoon. In the Forbidden Forest, where magic is both peril and salvation, Cavetier has no use. Centaurs scoff at it. Acromantulas are unaffected by it. The Whomping Willow once struck a 3rd year who used the spell near its roots, not in defense, but seemingly out of sheer boredom. The earth itself seems to mock the spell by swallowing its effects within moments. The whole collapses in on itself like the spell regrets being cast. The spell's history is equally uninspiring. Invented by a minor wizard named Orville Pott, who worked for the Department of Magical Maintenance, Cavetier was initially designed to assist in mole relocation programs. Unfortunately, moles don't respond to wand magic, and the program was deemed entirely useless after 5 years of 0 mole relocations and several complaints from gnomes. Orville later left the ministry to sell enchanted teaspoons. The only known duel where Cavetier was attempted was between 2 second-year students who misunderstood its power. One cast it hoping to destabilize the floor under his opponent. The result? A slightly awkward moment where both boys stared at a shallow divot in the grass before casting Rictusempra and ending things in giggles. The duel was later removed from the Hogwarts Dueling Club records for lack of dramatic tension. It is telling that in the Second Wizarding War, when every spell could mean life or death, Cavetier was never uttered once. Auras preparing for infiltration missions chose Disillusionment Charms, Aparecium, and even Muffliato, but no one chose to bring a portable dimple maker. As one Aura put it in his journal, "We were hunting dark wizards, not planting daisies." Even Peeves the poltergeist, who adored mocking students and defiling school tradition, never used Cavetier, and this is a being who once filled a hallway with ink and floated Mrs. Norris upside down. "Even Peeves has standards," muttered Argus Filch. "That spell's not even good for vandalism." Perhaps the greatest irony is that in a world teeming with majestic magic, where time-turners alter history and Patronuses banish despair, there exists a spell whose only legacy is mild amusement and soil disruption. It is a spell that offers no glory, no fear, no power, just the brief hope that something useful might happen, quickly dashed by a scoop of displaced earth. Cavetier, noted Luna Lovegood once in a column for the Quibbler, is a reminder that not all magic needs a purpose. Some spells exist just to remind us that we can shape the world, even if only a little, like nibbling at the crust of the universe. But even she admitted in a footnote that she never found much use for it and once accidentally killed a flower. In a world where spells ignite fire, summon creatures, unlock doors, and manipulate memory, Cavetier stands as a tribute to the unimpressive, a spell so devoid of potential that even its absurdity fails to entertain for long. It is magic without ambition, action without consequence, a whisper into the soil that not even the earth cares to remember. And so it lingers, buried not just in the dirt it was made to disturb, but in the forgotten corners of magical education, a spell that no one needs, no one teaches, and no one casts, unless perhaps they've got a mandrake to pot and a peculiar sense of humour. Number 28, Obscuro. Of all the hundreds of spells mentioned or implied in the Harry Potter universe, few inspire more confusion and indifference than Obscuro. On parchment, it promises strategic brilliance, a conjured blindfold of magical fabric that wraps around the eyes of its target, rendering them effectively blind. The spell seems, at first glance, clever and tactical. In reality, though, it's an archaic curiosity that serves more as a footnote than a game-changing charm in any magical conflict. Its flaws are not only glaring, but also fatal to its utility, especially in a world where magic is fast, volatile, and often lethal. Obscuro first appears in the Deathly Hallows during Hermione Granger's escape with the trio from the Lovegood house. Desperate to avoid being identified by the Death Eater traversing upstairs, she casts Obscuro to blind him. It worked, momentarily, but even this rare use highlighted the spell's central problem. It is, at best, a delay tactic, and at worst, completely pointless against a competent witch or wizard. Magical combat is not like Muggle warfare. It's not about sight, it's about willpower, intent, and reflexes, all of which operate independently of vision in experienced duelists. A prime example of this comes during the Battle of the Department of Mysteries in Order of the Phoenix. When Harry and his friends face the Death Eaters in the Hall of Prophecies, vision is only part of the battle. Bellatrix Lestrange, Dolohov, and even Lucius Malfoy cast curses with fluid, terrifying precision, often in darkness, amidst chaos. If a conjured blindfold had suddenly wrapped around one of them, it would have slowed nothing. The spells flew like daggers in all directions. Movement and reaction in magical duels are less reliant on what you see and more on what you sense. That alone already dismantles the theoretical effectiveness of Obscuro. Furthermore, the spell can be undone with startling ease. Finite Incantatem, the general counterspell known to even first years, effortlessly dissolves most magical effects. As Professor Flitwick demonstrated in Prisoner of Azkaban, even accidental magic, like Neville's broken teacup mishap, can be reversed with a flick of the wand. The same goes for magical restraints. In this context, casting Obscuro is akin to attempting to immobilize a trained aura with a napkin, pointless when they can vanish it with a thought. In battle, hesitation is death. That's why spells like Petrificus Totalus, which instantly locks the target's body into complete paralysis, are favored among both students and professionals. When Hermione used it on Neville in Philosopher's Stone, he fell to the ground like a stone statue. No vision, no movement, no speech. That kind of control is essential. A blindfold, no matter how magical, leaves too many variables intact. The target still hears, still speaks, still casts. Why waste precious seconds on a half measure? Then there's the trio of unforgivable curses. Take Imperius, for instance, the controlling curse that not only robs the target of their will, but renders them pliant to your exact commands. In Goblet of Fire, Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, demonstrates the horrifying elegance of this curse on a classroom spider. The creature is made to do backflips, hesitate on the edge of death, and obey without hesitation. Compared to this, Obscuro is laughably primitive, or the magical equivalent of throwing sand in someone's eyes while your opponent holds a loaded wand.